The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. How a murder saved my life. I was done. This time I meant it. There were several times in my life where I found myself considering it, contemplating taking my trip to the other side. Last time I had called the suicide hotline and eventually decided to give life one more try. Not this time. I felt completely at peace about it. This time, I was truly ready to die. I felt the scratchy fiber around my neck after slipping the rope over my head. The forever necklace, I thought in a dark little joke just for myself. The rope was tied to a metal loop that was drilled into the ceiling truss to be sure that I would not fail. I had never been so determined to accomplish anything in my life the way I was today. The old wooden chair I stood on creaked and groaned a mournful protest as I lifted my foot, ready to step off the chair. One deep breath, and I could let it all go. Then, someone knocked on the door. I froze in exactly that position, one foot on the chair and one foot off, wondering with a sudden twinge of anger who the hell could be knocking on the door. I spent every last dollar I had to rent this remote cabin where I could spend my last weekend in beauty and peace. The intrusive sound boomed again through the empty house, obliterating my illusion of peace. I slipped the rope back off my neck with irritation and watched it swing back and forth. "Don't go anywhere now. We're not done," I told the rope, before stepping off the chair and heading down the stairs, ready to berate the inconsiderate person who ruined my nearly perfect moment. After squinting through the peephole of the solid wood door, I could see a gangly man wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled up tightly over his head. A sharp black beard with speckled grey poked through the hood, and I could see a pointed pale nose, but otherwise, his features were largely hidden. The man was looking down, but swayed side to side on his feet impatiently, sending another spark of irritation through my clenched jaw. He knocked again, louder this time. I pulled the squeaky cabin door open against my better judgment, but he didn't seem to be leaving on his own, and my sudden anger took control of my arm, which reached forward and pulled the door open. "What do you want?" I asked rudely, not even considering the normal pleasantries. "Good evening, sir," the stranger said, a little too nicely. As he lifted his head, I could see that he had black combed hair matching his fairly well-groomed beard, a bit of grey mixing in with the dark black, a little dash of salt in the pepper, if you will. "My car broke down about a mile down that dirt road, and I was wondering if I could use your phone." The man felt like a used car salesman with his fake, almost painted-on smile and voice that sounded rehearsed. "I don't have a phone," I told him coldly. It was a lie, of course. While my cell had no service, there was a functioning wall-mounted phone in the kitchen. The older type, with a coiled cord connecting it to the wall mount. "Oh, I'm sure you have a phone. All the cabins up here do," he told me with his wide, aggravating smile. "Not this one," I told him shortly, ending the conversation and wanting him gone. I started shutting the door when he stuck his foot in the doorway, preventing me from shutting the door all of the way. "It'll only take me 30 seconds, then I'll be gone." Anger spiked in me when he blocked my door with his foot, and I thought about slamming his foot with the door. Instead, and without even giving him a response, I pushed him away from the door and slammed it shut. I heard the click of the deadbolt before I even knew I was locking it. I stood there for a minute, bewildered by the event. A twinge of guilt struck my gut. I felt maybe I should have helped him. The timing was poor, sure, but how was he supposed to know my grand plans? But at the same time, why should I help the guy anyway? Nobody had ever lent me a helping hand when I needed it. That's just how this cruel world works. Nobody gives a shit. And who puts their foot in someone's door? After staring at the door for some time, maybe a minute, maybe 15, I walked back upstairs and peered out through the window to make sure I was alone. He was gone, but I hadn't seen him leave. A strange uneasiness crept over me. Things weren't going how they were supposed to. I checked all the windows, looking for the weirdo. Nothing, so I made some quick tea. One last cup of tea sounded nice, and pushed the strange encounter out of my mind. It was time to find my peace again. I realized that the sun was now starting to set over the nearby mountain peaks. Why not watch it? This would be my last sunset, and it sure was a stunning one. I pulled a cozy recliner chair to the large upstairs window. Brilliant colors of orange and pink now filled the sky. The clouds were broken up, creating the appearance of a large, beautiful pathway over the horizon. It struck me that there it was. My beautiful pathway to the afterlife had presented itself, and it was time. It was time to take the path laid before me. I thought that maybe this was a sign that this was exactly where I was supposed to be. I realized I was standing back on the chair, but didn't remember deciding to get back up there. I once again placed the rope over my neck, already positioned so that I was facing the sunset. At that moment, I was completely at peace with my death. I started to take that step, and then there was knocking at the door. This wasn't the customary 3 or 4 knocks followed by waiting that had invaded my peace before. This was loud, panicked knocking that startled me so badly that I almost fell off the chair. It seems ironic that I was about to willingly step off the chair, but the next moment I was fighting for balance to not fall. The loud knocking continued. Once again, my beautiful, peaceful moment had been shattered. I removed the rope and went over to the opposite window to see who the hell had screwed everything up. This time, it was not the hooded weirdo standing at the door. It was a girl. She had long, dark hair and appeared to be about my age, maybe a little younger, and she was terrified, crying and panicked, knocking repeatedly and taking constant looks back over her shoulder. This time I wasn't overcome with anger, but a deep concern as I ran down the stairs to the door. As I approached the door, I could hear her pleading for help, still pounding on the door. The second I opened the door, she pushed herself in, slamming the door behind her and locking it. "What?" I started asking. But before I could finish my question, she slammed into me so unexpectedly, I let out an oof. But to my surprise, she pulled me into a tight embrace. Never in my life had I felt anybody hug me as tightly as this crying girl was squeezing me right now. I hugged her back, squeezing her just as tight. What's wrong?" I asked her with genuine concern as I blew her hair out of my face. She pulled back and looked me in the eye. I couldn't help but notice that, even through her tears and fear-stricken face, she was absolutely beautiful. Her long, dark hair complemented those beautiful green eyes in a perfect sort of way that reminded me of the sunset. They were a shade of green that I had never before seen, almost as if it was a new color that had not been discovered until this girl was born. For a moment, I lost myself in her eyes before the exasperating reality slapped me back to the situation at hand. He killed her. He killed Jess. Confusion quickly turned to a pit deep in my stomach at what she said. "What? Who? Who's Jess?" I asked her, still holding her tightly. He came to the door. She started, barely getting the words out through her sobs and deep breaths. He asked to use the phone, so I let him in, but he had a knife and the girl burst into uncontrollable sobs and buried her face in my shoulder. She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. The truth of the situation crashed down on me. The same guy who knocked on my door earlier had visited another cabin, and this woman had watched her friend to stab to death. I wanted to panic the same way she was, but knew with certainty that she needed me to stay calm, or at least seem calm. I quickly walked her into the kitchen, grabbed the phone with hands so shaky I nearly dropped it, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, My name is Dean Johansson. There's been a murder. It felt weird to say, and a weird fear struck me that maybe the voice on the phone wouldn't believe me. What's your address? Sir? The quick, professional voice responded. I gave her the address of the cabin I was staying at. Thankfully, it was on a card by the landline phone. I asked the girl for the address where the murder happened. She didn't know, but she managed to tell the operator that her name was Sarah, and the victim's name as well as a description of the killer. Okay, sir. Please lock the doors and stay inside. Emergency responders will be there in about 30 minutes. The phone lady told me in a matter-of-fact tone, as if this was a normal Tuesday call to IT. 30 minutes? What do you mean 30 minutes? I asked with deep exasperation. There's a murderer on the loose. I'm sorry, sir. That's the closest law enforcement to you. You're in a remote area. In those last words, I could finally hear a tone of emotion, a sadness that she couldn't help. Before I could respond, there was a loud knock on the door, making us both jump. Sarah cried out loudly and I dropped the phone. I signaled to her with a single finger placed over my lips, knowing full well that whoever was at the door would have already heard her cry out. And quietly, I walked to the door and nervously looked through the peephole. My heart slammed into my gut at the sight of the man who stood on the porch. It was him, the hooded car salesman asshole, but now his face and beard were splattered with blood. I need to borrow your phone, the man yelled in an unhinged sing-song tone. His fake nice had been replaced with a manic and insane tone, matching the crazed look in his eye. Boom! He kicked the door hard, shaking the door, but it held strong. I ran to the kitchen to grab my own knife. Sarah was already holding one. Boom! There was another kick. We stood there, terrified, and not knowing what to do. I braced for another boom, but there wasn't one. It was silent. You go upstairs, I told Sarah decisively. I'll stay down here just in case. I had come out here willing and prepared to meet death. Sarah didn't deserve that, though. I had only just met her, but I felt a genuine desire to protect her. And if this is how I went, at least my death had meaning now. I was fine with death, but if he came in, I could at least try to take him with me. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide and shocked, and she headed up the stairs. Just as she crossed the final step, the window of the sliding glass back door exploded as a large rock blasted through. I ducked instinctively as shards of glass rained down on me and looked back up to see the man climbing in through the large broken window. Smiling with an expression of adrenalized mania, I grabbed an ugly vase off the nearby end table and threw it at him, grunting with every ounce of strength I could summon. It missed terribly to his left, shattering on the cabinet to his right. With the knife still in my hand, I picked up a wooden chair and charged at him with bravery and confidence I had never felt before. The chair legs hit him square in the chest and face, catching him off guard. But it felt like hitting a brick wall. The recoil of the collision pushed the chair back into my chin, and we both were knocked to the ground. I looked over to see him already getting up, but within distance, so I slashed at him with my knife, aiming for the neck. I missed again, but still slashed through his face, sending a splatter of blood. But he barely flinched. He immediately slashed right back at me, putting a deep cut into my upper chest. I rolled backward, struggling in a panicked frenzy, trying to get to my feet. Before I was up to my feet, the chair hit me hard in my face and knocked me back to the ground. I staggered back up to my feet, despite the black spots from the hit to my head, noting the taste of blood in my mouth while the knife slashed past my throat. Narrowly missing me, I started punching and slashing wildly in a frenzy, overcome with an unfamiliar rage that perhaps had been waiting for years to be freed. I admit that I don't know how to fight. I'd honestly never needed to before, but something was working. I connected at least once more with the knife slicing a fresh wound on his shoulder. He was backing up and then, naturally, I tripped. My knife clattered on the hardwood floor. I rose to my knees, reaching for the knife, but was knocked down from a hard kick to my side. Every last molecule of oxygen in my lungs was expelled from my body with a disgusting grunt. I tried to breathe and regain myself, but only found an excruciating sharp pain in my ribs from where I was kicked. The man stood over me, a triumphant sneer on his face, ready to bring the knife down on me. Suddenly, I didn't want to die anymore. As the man started to bring the knife down, a chair crashed into his upper back and his head splintering with impact. He cried out in fury as the knife fell from his hand and he fell to his knees while I rolled away to lengthen the distance. I saw Sarah's wide-eyed face looking down from over the loft banister. She had thrown the chair that had kept me from getting stabbed right there on the floor. It was the chair I had been standing on when Sarah arrived. "You fucking bitch," the man yelled out, already back on his feet and armed. He started running to the stairs with his knife hand. Sarah was screaming as he seemed to forget about me and set his predatory sight on her. Her screams sparked a new sense of urgent adrenaline, and I found myself picking up my knife and running after him despite the pain. Sarah was backed into a corner, holding her large kitchen knife in front of her in both fear and bold defiance. While the intruder looked for his opportunity to make his move, he slashed at her, missing short but causing her to flinch badly. Before he could take a follow-up shot, I slammed the knife square into his upper back. The blade penetrated the right of his spine with a dull sound, accompanied by a horrific crack that must have been a rib giving way. The man collapsed to his knees while I pushed into the handle of the knife, trying to drive it deeper. He let out a roar of pure rage and pushed back against me. I tried to drive him to the ground, but he was stronger than I, even with the knife in his back, and was able to struggle to his feet. While this was happening, I saw Sarah running through the door with my rope. Instantly, I understood her plan. I wrapped my arms around his waist and arms, clasping my hands in front to trap his arms at his sides. I squeezed as tight as I possibly could as Sarah slipped the noose over his head. He was fighting violently now, and I struggled to restrain him. I held on as tight as I could, but the grip of my hands was starting to slip. Sarah was hurriedly tying the other end of the rope to the banister with shaky hands. With a sudden burst of strength, my grip failed, and the killer broke his arms free and lunged at Sarah. I charged at him, putting my shoulder into his side like a regular rugby player, pushing him toward the banister. Sarah jumped into the fight as well, throwing her weight into him. Together, we put all the remaining energy we had into one final push, knocking the killer over the banister and off the loft. The rope caught, with an audible crack. His fall was broken, as was his neck. Both of our knots had held. The body swayed gently over the living room, suspended by a noose tied to the banister. My noose. Sarah and I sat outside, waiting for the police to arrive. We'd walked out there, or rather she awkwardly helped me. After the moment was done, all of the physical pain came crashing into me at once. She was holding a bathroom towel over the deep cut in my chest, which was bleeding profusely and soaking my once white shirt in crimson. As the cool, mountainous air started bringing my body temperature to a reasonable level, she broke the awkward silence, addressing the elephant in the room. The elephant being the noose that had been hanging in the bedroom. "Were you going to?" "Yes," I admitted, looking down at my knees. I didn't need her to finish the question. I knew what she meant. Sarah gently grasped my chin and pulled it up. "Please don't," she told me, looking into my eyes. I once again saw in her teary eyes just how beautiful she was. The most beautiful person I've ever seen. "I won't," I promised, surprised to hear the words from my lips with tears now finding their way down my face. And I meant it. That was just over 18 months ago now, and I'm happy to tell you that I'm still here. But this story isn't just the story of how I didn't kill myself, but also the story of how I met the love of my life, how we were bonded through mutually assured survival. We saved each other, but she saved me in more ways than one. We are celebrating our honeymoon now, at a beautiful beach house overlooking the ocean. We chose a location as far from the woods as possible. We are still healing, but we are healing together. Sarah is healing from the trauma of her best friend, Jessica, being murdered. I am healing from years of personal neglect and self-destructive behavior. I didn't realize how broken I truly was until I met Sarah, and you can't fix what you don't acknowledge to be broken. As I sit here now, under the most beautiful sunset I have seen since that fateful day, I finally realize what was missing in my life. What was missing was not just the feeling of being loved, but having somebody to love. Story 2. Inside the circle. I like exploring, from state parks to virgin wilderness. I love going out and seeing things. I used to go alone a lot, just communing with nature and really roughing it. But thankfully on the day in question, I had someone with me. Jake hadn't wanted to go, had said he had a bad feeling about it. But I insisted. Jake is kind of a shut-in, and I thought that some fresh air and sunshine might help get out of his shell a little. Plus, it was spring, and who doesn't like to go hiking in spring? We were hiking in North Georgia, a state park I won't name so you don't go looking for it. It's beautiful out there. There's a river running through the gorge, places to swim and picnic, rock walls to climb if you're feeling bold, and lots of nature to commune with. We had come to the end of the usual trail, the river continuing on even if the marked trail didn't, and Jake looked at me oddly when I didn't turn around and go back. I want to see what's up ahead, I told him. I had never been beyond that, but I had always wanted to. No way, he said. That's out of bounds. The signs say there are holes or unstable terrain. So? I asked. So, it means it is dangerous. I know you're all about exploring, Chuck, but I'm not trying to die today. Oh, come on, I prodded. Just a little bit further. Don't be a wimp. He looked like he wanted to go back, but my heckling had gotten to him a little. Okay, he said, but if it looks bad, we turn around, understand? Yeah, I said, waving him off as we went past the signs and onto the unmarked trail. The signs were needless anyway. I thought, Georgia is swampy in some places and sinkholes and subterranean caves aren't that uncommon. We'd just avoid the soft areas and we'd be fine. I had read online that there was a waterfall at the end of the trail, but I had never seen it. Some hikers said it was beautiful and that it went all the way back up the cliff, which would be a pretty long drop for a waterfall. I wanted some pictures for my travel blog, and as we walked down the trail, I knew this was going to be a hike we'd both remember for years to come. I must not have been watching where I was going very closely, because all the warning I got was a little cracking sound before I was suddenly in free fall. I was watching the hole in the ceiling get smaller and smaller as I fell, and then everything went black for a little while. When I opened my eyes, that circle of light above me was more like a spotlight. I groaned as I tested my limbs, my back, and my neck, and found myself mostly in good shape. My head hurt, but my arms and legs still worked. I had fallen onto some kind of moss, something that had probably saved my brains from being splattered all over the floor. And as I lay there staring up into the ceiling, I saw a silhouette impose itself over some of the light. Chuck, thank God. I thought you were dead. I'm trying to get the Rangers, but I can't get a signal. You break anything? I sat up a little, rubbing my head where a knot was forming. I felt a twinge of pain in my back, but nothing too bad. I was smart enough not to push it, though, lest I mess myself up further and unrepairably. I don't know. My back. I think, well, that's better than most people after they fall into an underground cave, I guess. Unfortunately, I got all the climbing hooks and you got all the rope. I'm gonna head back up to the swimming hole and see if I can get some help. Hang tight. I'll be right back. Before I could say anything, Jake was gone, and I was left with nothing but the moss and the darkness around me. I didn't know how big the cave was, if I was in a cave at all, but the blackness seemed deep and impenetrable. As I lay there, the pain beginning to seep into my body, I thought I heard something. It was slight, no more than a tickle on the senses, but it was definitely something. It was like something with claws walking quietly on stone, like a rat but bigger than usual. I thought it was my imagination at first, But as it circled my spot like a shark preparing to strike, I realized I wasn't imagining it. I lay as still as I could, hoping that whatever it was would decide that I wasn't interesting or eatable. But when it spoke, I was taken off guard. It sounded like a woman, like a young, pretty woman. "Hello?" I stayed quiet, not sure what was going on, hoping it was a delusion or a hallucination. "Is someone there?" It sounded real enough, not like any of the voices I had ever heard in a daydream or a regular dream, and, despite myself, I decided to answer, "Hello?" There was silence for several long breaths, and then it spoke again. "Are you from up there?" she asked, and I assumed she was pointing to the ceiling. "Yeah, my name's Charles. What's yours?" Silence, silence, and then it spoke again. "I don't have one. No one has ever called me anything." That was weird. I didn't know anyone who didn't have a name. It made me wonder how long she had been down here, and who had left her down here. Had she fallen into one of these subterranean tunnels like I had? Had she gotten trapped without a way out? I asked her, but after 2 long breaths, she told me she didn't know. "I don't remember ever not being down here. It's my home, and if I lived up there, it was a very long time ago." The long pauses between conversations were a little weird, but I put it out of my mind. Clearly, she didn't get a lot of chances to talk to people, and she was just remembering how to make conversation. There was nothing wrong with that. In fact, I was glad she had found me. I didn't want to be down here all alone, and maybe I could help her get out once Jake came back. "Why don't you come over here into the light?" I asked, patting the stone beside my moss bed. "That way I can see you." Silence, silence, then speech. "I don't really like the light," she confided. "It hurts my eyes and it burns my skin." That made sense. I thought, if she had been down here long enough, then she was probably kind of sensitive to the light. I remembered reading about people who live in the dark too long and go blind when they take them in the sun, and I felt foolish for asking. It was really more my sense of vanity anyway. The idea that I might be talking to some old hag had crossed my mind, but she sounded young and pretty, and I guess I just wanted a look. "Is there anyone down here with you?" I asked, hearing my throat click as I said it. My throat was dry, and when I reached behind me, I felt for my water bottle and realized it had rolled off in the fall. I was thirsty, and I didn't know how long Jake would be gone. "Hey, you don't see a clear bottle anywhere in there, do you? There's water in it and I'm very thirsty." Sitting in the sunbeam wasn't helping matters much, and I was too scared to move to go looking for my sunscreen. I wasn't in a lot of pain, but they said that neck and back injuries could be exacerbated if you moved. I lay there, frying like a fish, and I just knew I was going to have a wicked sunburn when I finally got out of here. When the water bottle rolled out the darkness and bumped my hand, I had to stop myself from flinching away from it. I reached down, trying to move as little as possible, and as the water hit my throat, it was like pure honey. I splashed a little on my face, imagining I could hear the sizzle, and sighed in relief as I found some comfort from the heat. "Thank you," I said, looking at the darkness as if expecting to see someone peeking out at me. Silence, silence, then, "No problem. You're the first person I've had to talk to in a long time. I didn't want you to lose your voice." I smiled, glad to give her the comfort of a human voice. We talked a little, mostly involving me talking and her adding in things every now and again. I told her about hiking, about Jake, about the world above, and she seemed to enjoy my descriptions of things like TV and movies. For her part, she told me she had lived in the tunnels down here for a while, and that she could see in the dark pretty well. She ate whatever she found in the tunnels, and I wasn't the first person to fall in. That made me feel bad for her. None of them offered to get you out. You were the first one to be alive when you fell in. Some of them are alive for a little while, but they don't stay alive for long. No one comes for them, and they succumb to the fall. That gave me a chill, You mean they die? I asked. Silence. Silence. Then, yes. And no one comes for their bodies? Silence. Silence. Then, they do not find their bodies. I told you. Charles, I eat what I find in the caves. My mouth was dry again, but it had nothing to do with the heat. She had just admitted to being a cannibal, but I suppose one couldn't hold that against her either. She was trapped down here. Food was probably not plentiful. She had to survive the best way she could, but I couldn't understand how the park service didn't know people were going missing. How did they not collect the bodies before she got a chance to eat them? Did they just think people were lost in the park? I thought that maybe they should be a little more proactive, but then Jake's voice whispered in my head, like putting up a sign to stay off the dangerous trail. Were you... I tried to ask, but my tongue felt stuck to the roof of my mouth. Were you planning to eat me? Silence. Silence. Then... Yes, she said, not showing the slightest bit of hesitation. But you were alive and the sun was up. I usually don't find the bodies until after dark, so there's no sun to keep me away. That made me shudder. It isn't often you get to have a conversation with someone who's planning to have you for dinner. And if the sun had been down and I was still alive, I started, but I couldn't finish the thought. I didn't have to, though. Silence. Silence. Then, yes, she said. I was quiet, not sure how to answer, but she beat me to it again. I have to eat. Charles, all creatures must eat, and I am no exception. You don't feel weird about eating your own kind? I asked, trying to find the right word so she wouldn't be offended. Silence. Silence. Then, I do not eat my own kind. Charles, I eat people. My teeth chattered a little at that. Translation, she wasn't a person, which led my mind to ask the question I dare not voice. What was she? What was I down here with? Even if my back wasn't injured, even if I wasn't paralyzed, something I was pretty sure I wasn't, I still had no way to get out. I could no more jump 30 feet than I could have tossed Jake the rope. And I was at her mercy, it seemed. She needn't wait until dusk. I thought, as I watched a cloud cruise across the mouth of the hole, if it started to rain, if it became overcast, even if some stray cloud covered my hole in shadows, it would be nothing for her to snatch me back into the darkness. It was a sobering realization to discover that your life was hanging so tenuously. Charles? She asked, and I heard that clicking noise getting closer. Charles? Are you okay? I hadn't noticed until now, but her voice sounded artificial. It was like something approximating the sound of a voice, a speaker playing someone's voice from a video or something. It was a good copy, but I wanted to know what was making it. The longer I lay here, the less certain I was that she was a girl, and the more certain I was that I was talking to a monster. Charles? She said, and there was worry in her voice, as well as hunger. I'm here, darling, I said, making myself answer her. I was just wool gathering. I hit my head when I came down, and it made me feel a little woozy. The clicking came even closer to the circle of light, a circle that was, suddenly, not nearly wide enough. I do not know this word. Woozy. What does it mean? Is it like being tired? Yeah, I said. Yeah, it's a lot like being tired. I kept looking up, hoping to see Jake and the rangers up there. How long had he been gone? It had to be at least a half hour. I couldn't imagine that no help had come in half an hour. Even if he had walked all the way back to the station at the trailhead, someone should have come back by now. I didn't know if they could stop her from dragging me off and eating me, but I hoped so. Charles? Yeah, I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I thought it did. Are you afraid? I had to stop myself from answering with a Texas-sized hell yes, since that might provoke her. Nah, darling, why would I be scared? The clicking came up to the edge of the light, slow and unsure, and I imagined that I could see something there, just beyond the light, a face or something, and it did not look at all human. It looked like a bad driftwood carving or a strange idol from a heathen tribe outside of civilization, and I found it hard not to stare at the spot. Your heart is beating very fast. Your blood is pumping through your veins like a river. I can hear it. It's making me hungry. Are you afraid of me? I opened my mouth to deny it, but that was when someone called my name and a shadow imposed itself across the light. It felt like too much, and I wanted them to move as they blotted out some of the light. "Chuck?" Jake yelled. "Are you okay?" "Sure." "Great." I lied. Glancing over to see the face I hadn't seen was gone. Someone else cast a shadow over me, and I was shaking as my light was cut in half. "Chuck, my name's Ranger Mike, and I'm here to help. Ranger Gabe and I are going to rappel down. Is your back or neck injured?" I don't think so," I yelled, listening for the clicking and the voice of the knot woman. "I think I just hit my head." Mike talked to someone up there, and they concurred. "We're going to drop some flares down so we don't get stuck. Close your eyes. Okay?" I nodded, but there was no way in hell I was going to close my eyes with that thing around. It was strange how quickly she had become it, and how little I wanted to bring her back up with me now. I had no idea what I had been talking to, and suddenly I didn't want to know. I wanted out of this hole, out of this hell, and I promised whatever was listening that I would never scoff at signs there to keep me safe again. If they would get me out of here, I might never come back to the woods again. The flares came down, and I saw the cave was much bigger than I had thought it was. The flares sent up a ghostly light, casting everything in flickering illumination, and that was when I saw it. It was only for a second as it retreated down a side passage, but I caught a glimpse of what I had been talking to. The driftwood carving analogy wasn't far off. The whole thing looking white and thin and kind of fragile looking. It walked around on these long, thin legs that looked like nothing so much as pure bone, and its eyes were set high up on its bony forehead. It looked at me almost apologetically as it left, but the two rangers who rappelled down never so much as glanced into the cave. They had me up and on a stretcher before I could warn them, and after securing it all to ropes, they had the three of us winched up as the flares burned in the darkness below. There were more rangers at the top, paramedics too, and as they got me topside, I was dragged to stable ground and checked out by the EMTs. They said the bruise on my head was nasty, but there probably wasn't any brain damage. My spine appeared fine, though they wouldn't know for sure until I had an EKG, and my neck felt okay too. Ultimately, they said I was very lucky, and I told them they didn't know the half of it. I'm in a hospital room now, waiting for my EKG, but I just wanted to get this down while it was fresh. I can't prove that it wasn't a hallucination. The ER doc said I was definitely concussed, but I think it was all real. I talked with something under the ground, something that would have eaten me if it hadn't been for the light encircling me. I was extremely lucky, in a lot of ways, and I thank God I made it out with little more than cuts and bruises. If I hike again, I'll be paying attention to the signs from now on. You never know what you might find just below the surface. Story 3. Ever take a dogman to the vet? I should not be writing this. I know they will be looking for me as soon as this goes live. I had to get the word out despite all the secrecy surrounding the project. I don't know what they'll do to me when they find me, but this has to get out. I was unemployed vet tech looking for work when I came across a job listing offering a strangely large amount of money. What did I have to lose? I called the number and they gave me a website to go to that took me through an application process and a security clearance form that I had to fill out the last 7 years of my life. They said it would be months until the clearance would come through, but to my surprise, a month later, I got a phone call telling me I had been granted interim secret clearance and the job would proceed. I had to go to a building without any name on it downtown, and they took my photo for an ID card and a packet of information about where I was to go to the next day. The next morning I drove to the address with a mix of excitement and apprehension. What about this job required a security clearance? Why had I gotten my interim secret so quickly? I figured I'd soon find out when I pulled up to a gate with a card reader. I swiped my ID and the razor wire topped gate slid open so I could pass. Yeah, nothing ominous about that. I drove a mile or so down the road and parked in the parking lot in front of a building that looked like the set of a prison movie. The windows were narrow slits, and I could tell from a distance that the door was very heavy duty. Thinking back a few minutes ago, wasn't the top of that razor wire fence angled in, as if to keep something in rather than people out? I got out and approached the heavy door. I spotted the card reader and used my ID on it, and it flashed green, and there was a loud clunking sound from the door as it unlocked. I had to put some muscle behind it to get it to open, and then it shut behind me, followed by another loud clunk as the locks re-engaged. I turned to see a thick armored window with a guard staring me down. "First day, huh?" he asked me as he looked at his screen. "Yeah," I said a bit nervously. "Sit tight. Your department head will be coming to pick you up and take you to your in-brief," he said. What is this place?" I asked. "All that will be answered by the briefing, so have a seat and relax. You're likely in the safest spot in the facility," he said. I looked at the inner door and noticed it was just as thick and heavy as the outer one. I was essentially sitting in an armored booth, so he was technically right about it being safe. When my boss arrived, he was wearing scrubs and had his ID card clipped to the bottom of the V of the top. "So, you're my new tech?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied. "Good. Hopefully you follow instructions better than the last one," he said. "I'm Dr. Tanner. You can call me sir or doctor." "Sir, can you tell me what I'll be doing here?" I asked. "All in due time. First you need to complete the safety briefing. It is not a joke. Take a look at the windows and doors if you need convincing. The government doesn't spend this kind of money unless it's very necessary, and it is. You'll understand the need for it when I introduce you to our charges. I'm not going to tell you yet because I enjoy the look on people's faces when they get their first peek of what we're doing here," he said. "Now, for the safety briefing, follow me." He began to open the inner door when he stopped and looked back at me. "Do you have any electronic devices on you?" "No, sir. The security documents instructed me to leave my phone and anything with a digital memory in the car," I said. "Excellent. You're already demonstrating that you can follow directions," he said. Was that a hint of a smile I saw? He led me down the hallway to a room on the left and used his card to unlock and open the door. After I walked inside what appeared to be a conference room, he followed me inside and let the door shut. I immediately noticed the back of the door wasn't the usual thing one would expect to see. It had a big lever in the middle that looked like it operated bolts to secure the door shut. I started to wonder what the hell I had gotten myself into. I expected to be working with maybe the facility's guard dogs. This kind of security was on a level I hadn't experienced before. "Good. You're observant. Another plus," the doctor said. He walked over to the table and picked up a recorder and pressed play. A trilling alarm sound came for it, and he let it play for a few seconds before cutting it off. "If you hear that sound along with flashing red lights, you are to go to the nearest safe room, such as this one, and use this lever to bolt the door." He walked over and pressed a button by the windows, and the thick glass became opaque. "And you are to opaque the windows with the control in the room so nothing can see in," he said, and then pointed to a door on the other wall that had emergency supplies written on it. "There you will find food, water, and other necessities if you happen to be locked down for an extended period of time. There is also a radio already set to the control room frequency. If the phone is not working, pull the tab on the back of the radio so the battery makes contact and reports in with the information posted on the back of the door. That's basically who you are, where you are, and if there are any threats you know of near you. Otherwise, sit tight unless told otherwise." "Threats?" I asked. "Our charges are out of containment or an external threat," the doctor replied. "What's so dangerous that we need bunker rooms like this?" I asked. "All in due time," he replied. "Have you ever used a tranquilizer gun?" No, I responded. No matter. You'd need to qualify on the two types we use anyway with the security team, he said. Why do we need tranquilizer guns? I asked. The animals we work with are dangerous. They're sedated before they get to us, and one of our tasks is to make sure they stay sedated until they're returned to the enclosure. If one wakes up and slips a restraint, you are not going to want to go near it to give an injection. That's why we have tranq guns, the doctor said. That makes perfect sense to me, I said. My curiosity was burning, wondering what we were working with. Had to be something like large predators to require this much security. A grizzly would be a plausible reason why the doors had the extra bars. The force they could produce could snap the usual latches. Good, because it's time for my favorite part. Showing the new guy what we work with, the doctor said, and led the way deeper into the facility and up a set of stairs to a room labeled Observation Deck. The windows are to remain frosted by the electronic controls there whenever the room is not in use. They cannot see in, but they seem to know someone is watching them, and it upsets them. It's best for everyone if they are not upset. He reached over and pressed the button, and the electronic frosting cleared. That's the moment where my brain completely derailed and I questioned my own sanity. Werewolves? I asked. No, at least not at this facility. These are a lesser-known cryptid called dogmen, kind of like Bigfoot. Wait, is Bigfoot real? I asked. Yes, but not nearly as widespread as sightings would make you think, he said. If these exist, what else is real? I asked him. That's beyond your need to know, he said sternly, but then his face softened. I'll lend you a book later that contains everything we've confirmed and studied. After all, if you continue with this job, you will have the opportunity to work with them in the future, and it's best you know what you're getting into, he said. One benefit they probably haven't gotten around to telling you yet is that they will pay for your education. You can become a full veterinarian working with the most interesting creatures that exist, he said. Not a bad gig. Huh? Except for the part where I'm working with large, dangerous creatures, I said. Large, intelligent, dangerous creatures, he replied. And that is why we have procedures and rules. Things like always having more sedative stage to inject if a patient starts to wake up, having them restrained at all times, and if they do wake up, you have the tranq guns to put them back under without risking yourself, he said, and tapped the control to frost over the glass again. Our next stop was back in the conference room where there were now a couple of binders. Now for the boring part. Study these because you'll have to pass a test on them later. It's those procedures I mentioned. It covers everything from handling the animals, dosages we use, and why we can't leave after dark. Wait, we can't leave after dark? I asked, a bit alarmed. There are dogmen in the woods surrounding this facility. The fence does a decent job of keeping them out, but they do get in, and they're not happy. We have some of their kind captive. They're fairly shy during the day and become active at night, so it's for your own safety that once the sun sets, you stay here. We have secure rooms just for the occasion, and scrubs are not short in supply if you need a change of clothing. We have a mess hall staffed 24/7 by some excellent cooks. People who can do this job are rare, so they take care of us. Now get to reading. You'll have to pass a test before you're allowed to work. I'll come pick you up for lunch. I did as he said, and spent the next few hours reading with a break for the promised lunch that was beef stroganoff and actually really good. I went for seconds. Then it was back to memorizing policy and procedures till I was finally done and managed a passing score on the test. That was followed by some time at an indoor range getting qualified on the tranq guns. The doctor reviewed my test and nodded. Excellent. You're a fast learner. We've rescheduled some things for tomorrow, so we'll have the extra help. You head home and get a good night's rest. I'll see you in the morning in the veterinary section. Just follow the signs, it's easy to find, the doctor said. I did as he said and drove home. I couldn't help but be a good deal more vigilant as I looked at the woods on the way out. Dogmen were out there and no one in the area except us knew. There were the cryptid hunters, but they didn't know for sure, like I did from seeing a pack close up. Needless to say, I didn't get a whole lot of sleep that night. My mind was racing with the possibilities of what was real from all of the stories. In the morning, I made breakfast and sat for a bit, having to give myself a reality check that yesterday wasn't just a dream. So I finally picked up my keys and headed out. I drove down the lonely road and passed through the gate without incident. I parked my car and made my way through the security checkpoints and began following the signs to the veterinarian department. As the doctor had said, it wasn't difficult to find. There were 3 entrances, all like airlocks that were long enough for a gurney. It didn't take long to figure out the purpose. If you had dangerous animals inside, you wanted at least one door containment, so they couldn't get past you and into the larger facility. I went inside through the airlock like doors one at a time and found myself in a very familiar veterinary clinic, though one that was very well stocked. It was then that I met my other co-worker, I'll call him Mike, who was sitting on a stool reading a magazine. "Hey, you must be the new guy. I'm Mike," he said, and I introduced myself. "So, your first big day, you excited or terrified?" Mike asked. "A bit of both," I said honestly. "Relax. By the time they get to us, they've been pumped with enough drugs to drop an elephant. We take samples and the guards take them back out. Then we run the usual tests like any other animal. It's easy money," Mike said. "We're never in any danger." "What about all of the procedures?" I asked. "There's what's written down on paper, and then there's what is practical and works. If we followed the checklist for every dogman that's brought in here, it would just take us twice as long, and twice as long that it can wake up," Mike said. "So relax. I'll show you what you really have to do to streamline things." What was I to say? He'd obviously been doing this for a long time, and if his system worked, who was I to question it? Our first patient of the day made me the most nervous. The security team wheeled in a restrained female on a gurney right into the middle of our space, then they backed out. Being the new guy, I did the basics by checking heart rate, breathing, and looking into the eyes to make sure she was out cold. Everything was normal based on the numbers I had memorized. Mike watched me, corrected my stethoscope placement a little, and started drawing blood as soon as I was done. The moment he was done, he buzzed the guards to take her back out while he labeled the samples. "Less time they're in here, the better. So label your samples and fill out the papers once they're taken out," Mike said. "No need to have a dangerous animal laying around while we fill out forms." "What about the extra sedative we're supposed to have ready?" I asked. "The tranq guns are right there. Much safer to back off out of reach and just shoot them with another dose," Mike said. I couldn't fault his logic. We had 4 more patients that day, all went as smoothly as the first, and I was beginning to relax. It was our last patient of the day when things went wrong. It started normally with the guards rolling the male into our space, and I took vitals and checked the eyes. "Hey, I have some dilation here. I don't think he's under enough. Where's the sedative?" I asked. "Don't worry about it. I'll be done before he realizes what happened," Mike said, and undid one of the restraints a little so he could get to the vein. It was at that point things went horribly wrong. As soon as Mike inserted the needle, the male woke up and jabbed its hand upward, catching Mike in the throat and spraying blood everywhere. I moved forward out of instinct to try and tighten the restraint when I felt a searing pain across my face and my right eye went red. I stumbled back. Oh God, had I lost my eye? I shook myself out of it long enough to badge through a door and throw the bolts before pressing the intercom button. "Creature out of containment in veterinary. I think Mike is dead. I'm hurt and need a medic," I said before blacking out. I don't know how long it was, but when I woke up I was in a hospital room and the veterinarian was sitting beside my bed. "You're safe. You're in a hospital and just out of cosmetic surgery. You'll have some scars, but it'll look like the result of a big cat. Your eye is fine." "Mike?" I asked. Dead before any help would get to him. We have video of the whole thing, including you questioning him multiple times on matters of procedure. Don't let someone senior intimidate you into not being safe. You have a month's paid leave to recuperate, he said. So here I am. I need some advice. Should I go back to work after my leave is done or turn in my resignation? It won't take them much to figure out who I am if they find this post. I also don't know what they'll do to me if they do. Story 4. Dylan's diary. Someone we didn't know tried to pick Dylan up from school today, said his elementary teacher. The guy said he was Dylan's older brother. Dylan doesn't have a brother, I said, alarmed. We thought so too, replied the teacher. I suspected something wasn't right straight away. It was this tall, lanky guy with black hair, looked in his late 30s, maybe even 40. He knew your address, Dylan's full name and birthday and which class he was in. I went inside to check with the principal. When I came back out, the guy was gone. I was silent for a second as I stood facing the teacher outside the school gate. The gate separated the main road and a large playground and basketball court. Leading into the school, all the other kids and parents had left, and we were the only ones standing outside. Where's Dylan now? I asked. He's waiting for you in the principal's office, she said, gesturing for me to follow as she turned around. I walked across the playground behind her shakily, then through the corridors to the office. My 8-year-old son Dylan sat on the couch in the principal's office. Still as a stone, the principal sat behind her desk, and there was a cop standing next to her. Hey buddy, I said, you okay? Dylan looked at me blankly. My Dylan was always a quiet boy. It was just the two of us at home at the time. I was a single dad, my late wife Angie. Dylan's mother died a year prior. She'd been hit by a car while cycling around a sharp bend, and they never identified the driver. I won't go into any more detail here, as frankly I'd rather not relive that period, but safe to say it destroyed me. I tried to pick up the pieces and stay strong for Dylan. Was I doing a good job? Only God knows. I received no feedback. Since then, Dylan became even more withdrawn, pretty much remaining silent until spoken to. He was seen by a child psychologist and various other members of the welfare team at school, but after assessment, they were sure he didn't have autism or the like. He could speak up when he was pressed. He was just shy and preferred to keep to himself. The cop confirmed I was Dylan's dad, then asked me a few questions. He finally told us they'd try and find the guy and to report if we ever saw him again. The principal and teacher said a few things. It was a blur. All I remember is sweating profusely with my knees shaking, trying to comprehend the fact that someone had tried to kidnap my son. Dylan, you didn't know that man, did you? Asked the principal. Dylan shook his head. I was on edge after that day. Dylan was my whole world, all the family I had left, and I couldn't stand the possibility that he could be in danger. It made me sick. Who was this bastard? Why my son? Did he know us? Or was it some random creep? I always walked Dylan to and from school thereafter, and was never late to pick him up again. Meanwhile, Dylan himself didn't seem rattled in the slightest. He never mentioned the incident unless specifically asked. At the time, I thought he was just timid and didn't want to cause trouble. A couple of weeks later, after the incident, the same homeroom teacher called me during her lunch break. She said one of the kids in her class saw Dylan talking to a man through the school fence. When she rushed out, the man was gone. When Dylan was asked about it, he said he hadn't been talking to anyone. The girl who apparently spotted him was questioned further, and she was adamant she saw Dylan talking to a tall, lanky man with messy black hair. The cops were called again, did a quick search of the perimeter of the school, but they found no one suspicious. That afternoon, I sat Dylan down at the kitchen table. I won't get angry. I just need you to tell me the truth, I said, trying to steady my nerves. Did you or didn't you talk to a stranger today at school? Yes or no? He shrugged. Getting an answer out of him was harder than drawing blood from a stone. How many times have we told you not to talk to strangers? It's for your own safety. You do understand that, don't you, son? He nodded, looking slightly afraid. I realized I had raised my voice and felt guilty immediately. exasperated and running on 2 hours of sleep. I left him at the dining table and went straight to bed. That night, I woke at 2 a.m. and went for a bathroom trip. I decided to check on Dylan while I was at it. He wasn't in his room. I called out his name and looked around in the living room and kitchen, getting more frantic as the seconds ticked by. I checked wardrobes, corners, even in cupboards, which made no sense to look in as he'd never fit in them. But I was desperate, thinking he'd been kidnapped. I went out into the street, yelling his name as I ran up and down it like a maniac to no avail. As I came back into the house ready to call the police, I looked in Dylan's room for one last check. He was sitting up on his bed, wide awake and staring back at me. "Where were you?" I asked, relieved but still alarmed. "I was here," he replied. "No, you weren't. I was looking everywhere for you. And you weren't in here." I was. Had I imagined all of that? I shook my head, feeling a migraine coming on. "Just stay in your room, okay? Don't scare me." I thought my eyes had deceived me somehow, and the paranoia was getting to me. Perhaps I should have paid attention to the fact that the window was wide open. About a year after those incidents, I heard a knock at my apartment door. I was inside doing some paperwork while Dylan was in his room playing Minecraft. I was on alert immediately. No one ever knocked on the door. We lived in a block of apartments, and friends or acquaintances would always wait outside the main door, ring the doorbell, and I would greet them downstairs. This meant it was likely an upstairs or downstairs neighbor who needed something. I had a few of their numbers from when we moved in, for contact should the need ever arise. But we weren't close at all. I wondered what could be the problem. I walked up to the door and looked outside the peephole. There was no one there. Odd. I thought, perhaps I had heard something. Those random occurrences were commonplace now, and second-guessing myself was just in my nature at that point. As I walked back to my desk in the living room, I heard another knock. Something was up. I walked up to the door again. No one seen through the peephole. Was someone pranking us? I stood just behind the door and texted my upstairs neighbor, asking him if he'd knocked on the door. A few moments later, I heard footsteps upstairs that went in the direction of the door, then hurriedly back into the apartment. I then received a text back, about a minute later. "Do not open the door. There's a guy with a huge knife crouching hiding right next to your door." My phone buzzed again, another text from my upstairs neighbor. "Calling cops, RN. Stay inside." I froze, as all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I was paralyzed for a few seconds. When I came to my senses, I tiptoed to Dylan's room. "Stay inside. Keep quiet," I whispered, my eyes bulging, beads of sweat dripping down my forehead. I had never felt my heart beat so fast. Dylan looked up and raised his eyebrows as I shut his door slowly and stood outside it, about to throw up and shit myself at the same time. We were so still that I could make out quiet but frantic talking upstairs, and more rushing footsteps. I read my upstairs neighbor's texts again to make sure my eyes hadn't deceived me. I tiptoed to the kitchen and grabbed one of my own kitchen knives, then returned to the same spot outside Dylan's room, anticipating a crazed psycho busting down the door at any second. I chanted manic prayers for safety on repeat in my head. Not a sound came from inside his room. After what seemed like years, I heard sirens in the distance and my heart rate started to slow a little. My grip on the knife handle loosened. Eventually I heard some shouting, more footsteps and banging that gradually faded in volume. "This is the police," shouted a voice. I looked through the peephole to confirm that it was a cop, then opened the door, knife still in hand. They were very reassuring, and informed us that a tall, lanky man with black hair had just been apprehended and taken into police custody. He had knocked on my door and was waiting for someone inside to open it. He was indeed waiting with a freshly sharpened knife. What was he going to do with it? To the first person who opened that door, which was going to be me. Well, if it isn't obvious, then your guess is as good as mine. This guy's name was Gregory. He seemed to bounce around from place to place with no permanent address, even traveling between states, and doing petty crimes like theft, harassment, and occasionally stalking minors. When they did a more thorough search, it turns out he had been involved in at least one gruesome murder in a different state, and ended up being given a life sentence for it, along with his accomplices. I wouldn't have wished that terror upon anyone, but these unfortunate things happen. The side effects of the psychological damage I experienced that day have never left me. However, I know people who have been through similar horrors, but never lived to tell the tale. So I looked on the bright side and counted myself lucky. Where there are sick freaks, there will be victims. The sicko was in jail, and I thought that was the end of it. But there was a different side to the story that I only uncovered 10 years after the incident. Dylan was due to leave for college, living away from home for the first time. He had grown into a tall kid with a surprising number of friends, still obedient, but relentlessly quiet. While packing his things and clearing out his room, I found a rugged-looking old notebook at the back of his bottom drawer. Dylan's diary, said the cover. I flicked through it with no intention to pry initially, and saw that he had written and drawn in it extensively, with impressively neat handwriting. He had always been a boy of few words, so I was intrigued. I began reading from the first page. Page 1, Cody's house, 11 a.m. He has to give me back my coat. There were a few stick figure drawings. Page 2, I need a book for English class next week. Ask if Amy has one. I turned the pages, and the first few were filled with the same mundane elementary school day-to-day affairs, mixed in with a few doodles. Then I got to page 21. Page 21, why does my dad talk so much? He won't even let me get an Xbox, and he won't let me sleep over at Cody's house. Talking back is no use. I hate him. I felt a sting, and my heart sank. I remembered that day vividly, and a pang of guilt ran through me. I turned the page. Page 22. Saw Greg today. He says he can help me get rid of Dad. I said he was lying, but he says he's done it before. It was in the news. As my mind connected the dots, I flicked through the previous pages. This was the first mention of Greg I could find. I started to sweat, but continued reading. Page 23. Me and Greg are coming up with a plan. Need Dad gone, but I almost got caught talking to him today. Mrs. Watford, that stupid old mole rat, kept asking me. She took me to the principal's office again. I think Katie saw Greg and snitched. Need to be careful. A few blank pages, with a few in between filled with scribbles and admin-type notes to self. Then the narrative continued. Page 41, the word plan was underlined, with 2 drawings underneath. The first was of a stick figure kneeling by a door, holding what looked like a dagger. This stick figure was smiling. There was another stick figure behind the door, with its hand on the door handle, about to open the door. The second was of the first stick figure stabbing the stick man who had just opened the door. His eyes now 2 crosses. Page 42. Greg came to my house and I showed him my plan. He said it was good and he could do it. We almost got caught by Dad, but I got back in bed just in time. He's going to get some tools from his house. Close one. Page 43. Greg screwed up. Hez in jail now. Why did Dad not open the door when Greg knocked? Everything went wrong. I don't know why. Page 44. I wish my dad would just shut up. I flicked through the rest of the notebook, which was blank. Page 44 was the last entry. I read the entries a few times and pondered what I should do. I never thought Dylan was capable of such heinous intentions. Confused and upset, I acted as if nothing had happened for a few days. But on the day he was due to leave for college, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I brought his duffel bag down and hooked it on his suitcase. He was ready to head to the station, standing outside the door with the suitcase and his backpack. Dylan, when you were younger, did I ever say or do anything that hurt you? You can be honest with me. No. Why do you ask? He replied. I held up the diary. He froze for a second, and I saw the color drain from his face. I won't blame you for anything. Don't worry. You know I love you very much. Son, you were a minor, and you were a victim of a very sick man. Besides, this thing is years old. I just want to know what I did wrong at the time to lead to this, and we can put it behind us." His shocked expression faded, leaving his ever-present blank stare. "You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did Mom." I opened my mouth to ask him what he meant by that, but stopped. The corners of his mouth stretched into a wide smile. Our eyes met, and we stood in silence for a few seconds. "Dylan, if I were to find another one of these notebooks," I began tactfully, "would I see the blueprint of my wife's murder inside?" "Yeah." He didn't even pause to answer. Then he gripped the handle of his suitcase and walked off down the street. That was 2 years ago now. I never forgave him. Every night I still lie awake thinking whether he was born that way or it's somehow my fault. We haven't talked since he left that day, and he hasn't come back home. He's never tried to contact me, and I haven't likewise. It looks like he's doing well in college from his Facebook posts. He seems to have a lot of friends, so I assume he got his own place or stays with one of them. I wonder if any of them will ever find out who he really is. Wouldn't blame them if they never do. After all, I still don't know who my son is, and I raised him for 18 years. Story 4. The Curse of Stonemore Manor. My remaining years are few and my body is weak, yet my memories are still sharp, so I shall share a tale I've long kept secret. I no longer wish to take it with me to the grave. I once feared that others might be drawn to this horrible experience of mine, like those who wander too close to the edges of a roaring tornado, only to be consumed and mangled beyond recognition. But I've come to realize that it was naive to think this way. Though some may not heed a tornado's warning, that's no reason not to sound the alarm, and so I tell this story with that purpose in mind. Consider this the gravest of warnings to stay away from Stonemore Manor. In the year of 1953, I was but a young man, though already busy with the responsibilities of a career and a family. Despite my tender age, I had already dabbled in various trades, for I was a restless spirit, never one to settle, from labor to intellect. I had tried my hand at it all, with equal prowess in both craft and wit. I found my true calling in a profession that demanded both: veterinary medicine. Life in Ireland was tough in those times. Many young families were heading off for better opportunities overseas. Though I was hesitant at first, myself and the wife decided we'd eventually do the same for our daughter's sake. But I wasn't about to take them to a new land empty-handed. So we agreed to stay another year in Ireland while I put away some coin to stretch our savings as far as they would go. We chose to see out our final year in a rural spot where the cost of living was kinder on the pocket. With but a year's worth of experience as a vet under my belt, I had yet to earn myself a reputation worth speaking of, nor had I much acquaintance with the locals in the village we'd chosen as our temporary home. Still, I held firm in the skills I possessed, my eagerness to learn, and my belief that this countryside community of farms and fields would provide ample chances to prove myself. To put it plainly, I was brimming with confidence. Some might even call it cockiness. I suppose it was a mixture of that and desperation which brought me to Stonemore Manor. As the days stretched into months, I found myself haunting the local pub like a ghost, a familiar face among the regulars. My confidence was dwindling with the lack of work. It seemed like everyone in that village had the healthiest animals in all of Ireland, maybe even beyond. What a cruel twist, their blessed lives mocking my own struggles. One evening, in my drunken stupor, I hadn't noticed at first the gaunt figure come into the pub and saunter over to the shadowed corner where I was drowning my sorrows. It wasn't until he spoke that I saw him. "Are you the veterinarian?" he asked. I raised my head and steadied my blurred gaze on the face of a man whose sunken features made him look more shadow than flesh. For a moment, I even thought I was looking at a skeleton. Aye, that'd be me. They seek your presence at Stonemore Manor. And what's the reason for that? The master's horse has taken ill. And what does this master go by? The man glared in silence, then in a tone tinged with irritation and raised volume, declared, "His name is Alistair Stonemore." In an instant, The chatter in the pub fell silent, and every gaze turned toward our shadowed corner. Seems you've caught everyone's ear. Should I know this master of yours? Then, I asked, under the weight of the pub's collective gaze. The man squirmed uncomfortably, his voice lowering as he muttered, "It matters not. You'll be well rewarded for your troubles." Past the man, the bartender shook his head in disapproval, fixing me with a stern glare, and silently mouthed the word, "No." Despite the bartender's cautionary glance, fueled by youth, folly, and a healthy dose of drink, I brushed aside his advice and turned to the man, blurting out, "How much is this Master Stonemore offering?" The man leaned closer, his face illuminated by the flickering candlelight, revealing a gaunt, pallid countenance and foggy eyes. He looked every bit of his 70 years or more, sufficient to settle comfortably upon reaching the shores of America. He murmured. In that moment, it would have been prudent to heed the warning signaled by the hairs standing on end at the nape of my neck. When your instincts scream, "Leave," it's best to listen. But the allure of a swift resolution to my troubles clouded my judgment. The prospect of a better life sooner than expected was too tempting to resist. So, I rose from my seat and addressed the man. "I'll go fetch me things." I made the decision I believed was best for my family. God rest their souls. I kept from my lovely Mary the weight the Stonemore name carried in the pub. She'd have put a stop to my leaving in an instant. Instead, I spun a tale of a wealthy gent in need of my skills, assuring her I'd be back when the job was done, with our wee Annie already tucked in for the night. I kissed my wife goodbye, gathered my tools, and slipped into the back of a sleek black sedan, driven by the mysterious man with eyes like fog, seemingly undeterred by their cloudy gaze. I leaned in and murmured, "Didn't quite catch your name. Sorry." "Never said it." "Ah, right. What is it?" "Then?" "Fergus." "Pleasure." "Fergus. I'm Liam." "I know." "Right. The ad. You've seen me ad." With no response from Fergus, I pressed on, asking, "How far is Stonemore Manor from here?" "About a half-hour drive." What ensued was a half-hour journey enveloped in silence, traversing through the village and onto a dirt path winding through a dense, shadowy forest. Eventually, we arrived at an iron gate, which swung open onto a secluded road. Despite my keen observation, I couldn't discern who operated the gate, nor who secured it shut behind us. 10 minutes further along this secluded path, the woods parted, revealing the grandeur of Stonemore Manor for the first time. It bore a striking resemblance to a castle, its exterior fashioned from grey stone adorned with towers and crenellations, save for the central portion, which appeared to be of Victorian design. Judging by the numerous windows, the manor rose at least 4 stories high, not accounting for any underground levels. The manor lay bathed solely in the moon's glow, devoid of any external illumination. Among the multitude of windows, only one emitted light, a solitary glimmer from a small window perched atop one of the corner towers. Fergus brought the car to a halt, then stepped out and opened my door. With a nod, he gestured towards the manor and uttered, "Master Stonemore awaits you within." "Up there, is he?" I acknowledged, stepping out of the vehicle and casting a nod towards the illuminated window. Ignoring my question, Fergus closed the door firmly. "Come along," he directed, leading the way towards the looming manor. We climbed stone steps to confront a grand iron door, effortlessly opened by old Fergus. He gestured for me to enter before closing the door with a heavy thud that echoed through the foyer, cast only in the moon's silver light. The room revealed itself in fragments, with stone stairs disappearing into the shadows ahead. Fergus had vanished from sight, leaving me to navigate the dimness alone. I called out for Fergus, but my voice echoed unanswered, stirring a growing sense of unease. Doubt crept in, whispering of traps and deceit. With cautious steps, I retreated towards the door, its cool iron offering a sense of security. Fumbling in the darkness, my heart quickened with each passing moment. panic threatening to overwhelm me. Just as my trembling hand found the handle, the room burst into light. Departing so soon, are we? A new voice pierced the silence, resonating with youth and vigor unlike Fergus's. Swiveling around, my eyes met those of a tall, middle-aged man clad in a sleek black three-piece suit, accented by a bold red tie, with raven black hair framing his face and piercing blue eyes. He commanded the landing of the steps, which diverged to his left and right. Sorry now. I seem to have gone and misplaced Fergus. I chuckled sheepishly, thought he might have been locked out. I take it you're Mr. Stonemore. Please, call me Alistair, he replied with a nod. And you must be Dr. Kerrigan. Aye, Liam. That's me name, I stammered. Only the creatures call me Doctor. I couldn't tell if the jest garnered even a smirk, for Alistair remained rooted to the spot at the top of the stairs, a considerable distance away. Anyhow, I persisted. I understand there's a sick horse in need of attention. Are you drunk? Doctor. Alistair's tone was pointed, his gaze piercing. Alistair's question caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless, akin to a child caught in mischief. Yet, I had a feeling of innocence. After all, it was Fergus who had recruited me from the pub. I've had a few pints this evening. I can smell it on you. That is truly impressive. There is nothing impressive about it, Dr. Kerrigan. Well, I didn't go swimming in it, did I? I do not know, and I find your sarcasm unwelcome. Fergus will escort you to a chamber, and you shall begin attending to my horse at daybreak. Hold on now. I'm sorry for me behavior, but I can't be staying the night. I've got a family to get back to. And anyhow, shouldn't this horse be needing emergency treatment? Alistair turned on his heel and ascended the staircase to his right. Treatment can wait until you've sobered up, he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. I'm plenty sober, I hollered after him as he vanished up the stairs. Me hands are steady as a rock. My protest echoed through the empty foyer, but Alistair had already disappeared from sight. Fergus emerged from the shadows of a nearby hallway, causing me to startle. I will show you to your room. You're a right sly one, Fergus. Anyway, I can't be sticking around for the night. Master intends to further compensate you for your time. And if I refuse, then I shall return you to your burdens. With my jaw clenched and eyes shut tight, I drew in a deep breath. For a fleeting moment, a vision danced in my mind's eye. My little Annie, her smile radiant as she pointed towards Lady Liberty. So precious she was. My heart ached with longing for her to have a better life. Fine, I relented, opening my eyes. Show me to the room. As I awoke, it was not to the gentle glow of morning light, but to the harsh brightness of noon. Jumping from the bed, I checked my watch, confirming my fears. With urgency, I slipped on my shoes, grabbed my bag, and hastened out of the bedroom. Stepping into the hallway, I was disoriented, with no recollection of its layout from the night before. Rows of closed doors lined the corridor, and I began to try each one in turn, pushing and pulling. I soon realized that every door was locked. Surely, not every room warranted such security. I pondered, my frustration growing with each failed attempt. As I ventured down the hall and finally arrived at the imposing stone staircase, the resounding clicks of each door unlocking in unison sent shivers down my spine. Goosebumps prickled across my skin, and I hastened my descent down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I reached the bottom, I came to an abrupt stop, narrowly avoiding a collision with the ghastly figure of Fergus. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Jesus." "Fergus!" "It's noon. Has the horse given up the ghost yet? And I haven't a clue what's happening upstairs. But Master Stonemore awaits your presence in the stables." I looked at Fergus a moment, wondering if he'd heard a word I'd said, then relented. "Okay, then, can I use a phone first?" "There's no phone on this property." No phone? That's a bit old-fashioned, isn't it? I need to let me wife know where I am. I will send word. Quickly. Then, just let her know not to be worrying about me. I'll be back once the job is done. Fergus nodded in acknowledgement before guiding me towards the stables. In the light of day, the grandeur of Stonemore Manor became even more apparent. It truly was a colossal structure, dominating the landscape with its impressive presence. The stables were nearly empty, save for one stall at the far end, where I found Alistair tending to a black thoroughbred, sprawled on straw, barely clinging to consciousness. "She's a beauty, isn't she?" Alistair remarked, not lifting his gaze from her. "Aye, but she's in a bad way." Alistair nodded solemnly. "She's been like this for some time." "You should have woke me." "Wouldn't have changed a thing." Alistair paused in his brushing of the horse's mane and rested his hand upon her flank, following the rhythm of her strained breaths. "Isn't it me duty to tend to her?" Alistair withdrew his hand and straightened up, his eyes bluer than ever. "No, it's not." And just then, the horse's breathing stopped. "Come along, Doctor." Alistair guided me through the grand house, down echoing halls, and into a room adorned with portraits aplenty. He paused in the center of the room and asked, "Any of these faces look familiar?" I scoured the walls until I stumbled upon a particular painting, a sight that nearly shook me to the core. In that frame, a woman and a young lass gazed back at me, bearing an eerie resemblance to my own Mary and our sweet Annie. My blood boiled with fury. Convinced that this portrait depicted my own wife and daughter, suspicion gnawed at me, and I eyed Alistair with distrust, wondering if he was some sort of obsessed deviant. "Out with it," I demanded, my voice sharp with anger. "No need to fret, Doctor. This painting predates your girls by quite a stretch." "I'm not taking it. They're too alike for comfort." "I'm just as baffled as yourself," Alistair conceded, his words laced with sadness. "The girls in the painting are my dear wife and daughter. Both passed away some time ago." I stood silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize." My gaze returned to the portraits before scanning the room again, my eyes catching on something odd. "Don't you have any photographs of them?" Alistair let out a weary sigh and turned to me. "I'm afraid not," he confessed. "They passed before photographs were even a notion." A puzzled chuckle broke from my lips. "Surely not. Cameras have been about for 100 years," I countered, shaking my head in disbelief. Alistair fixed me with a steady gaze, betraying no hint of doubt or error. "So it be," he affirmed with quiet certainty. Apart from Alistair's piercing blue eyes, other features seemed to have taken on a newfound radiance. His skin possessed a youthful glow. His hair appeared fuller, and his jawline more defined. Alistair, it seemed, had undergone a remarkable rejuvenation, growing younger right before my eyes. "Pardon me asking, but in which year were you born, Mr. Stonemore?" Alistair smirked and made his way to a sizable wooden desk and lowered himself onto a chair. "Are you a man of faith, Dr. Kerrigan?" Assuming this to be a roundabout approach, I responded, "Aye, I've a healthy fear of the Almighty." Alistair rummaged through a drawer and withdrew a hefty leather-bound tome, causing a cloud of dust to rise as he placed it upon his desk. Flipping it open, he motioned for me to approach. Amongst the sea of words, atop the first page, was a title, "The Knights Templar." What Alistair divulged to me was a tale so fantastical, it surpassed any yarn I'd ever heard spun. He claimed to have once been among the legendary Knights Templar, embroiled in the Crusades and journeying across continents in pursuit of sacred relics and hidden truths. But as history tells, the Templars met a grim fate, condemned by their own church and hunted to extinction. Yet, Alistair was no mere casualty of that bloody chapter. He was a survivor, lurking in the very woods where Stonemore Manor now stood, clutching to the shadows with a treasure in hand. Amongst the spoils of his clandestine escapades was a fabled emerald tablet, etched with secrets believed to bridge the mortal realm with the divine. Alistair, having purloined the tablet and sought refuge in the forest, claimed to have communed with the Almighty himself, and in that sacred dialogue, he made a plea, and it was granted. Thus, his years became as boundless as his desires. As his narrative drew to a close, Alistair closed the book and beckoned me to follow him back to the stables, stunned into silence after what I'd just heard. I trailed behind him as we retraced our steps to the very spot where we had witnessed the horse's demise. And once we arrived, still, my tongue lay dormant as I beheld the miraculous sight before me. The once lifeless creature now stood vibrant and strong. Finally, a solitary word escaped my lips, a gasp of incredulity as I uttered, "How?" The Lord bestowed upon me a gift, Alistair confessed. His voice weighted with solemnity, but it came at a cost. In death, I find life. With each soul I take, I grow younger. The transformation in Alistair's appearance now made sense, yet it did little to quell my lingering doubts about the resurrection of the horse. But why is the horse alive? Then, I pressed, seeking further clarification. In response, Alistair simply glanced past me, nodding toward a figure looming in the shadows. Turning, my eyes fell upon Fergus, his form now even more weathered, his countenance more gaunt and grey. He looked to have aged another decade. Alistair spoke as I stood in awe, elucidating. With death, I am rejuvenated, yet with life, Fergus withers further. I take and I gain. While he gives and he loses, our blessing is also our curse. Fergus looked on with weary eyes and sagging shoulders. There was a portrait earlier that escaped your notice. Doctor, Alistair interjected. It was the portrait of my son, Fergus Stonemore. Story 5. Memoirs of a Long Pig. We're a meat family, my dad would proudly tell strangers. He'd wait for the quizzical look, then launch into detail, starting with how many freezers we had, how long we could sustain ourselves on the contents. It was just his way of starting a conversation, which made sense when you considered that raising and home-killing animals for food was, for want of a better term, his lifelong hobby. His prized possession was one of those industrial-sized vacuum sealers. You could put half a pig inside and wrap it in plastic so tightly that every wrinkle and skin fold waxed unreal with shiny detail. If we hadn't lived in a rural area, albeit semi-urbanized, I guess it would have been pretty weird. But the mostly farming stock locals only found his extra enthusiasm a little bit odd. When he wasn't being a bit embarrassing talking about it, I never really paid much heed to his hobby. I had a child's vaguely grateful awareness that though our family went through some lean financial times, our stomachs never suffered like some of the families around us. All the beef, pork, ham and bacon in those big old chest freezers passed down from his dad really could have fed us for years. I should preface all this by saying that I wasn't a particularly bright kid. Though neither was I dumb. I didn't fail badly at anything in school. I just never achieved beyond a pass. I didn't know it yet back then. Still quietly dreaming about being a ballet star or a dressage champion. But mediocrity was my destiny, and I think that's why I got on so well with my Aunt Liz. Liz was my dad's live-in youngest sister. She was one of those women who get described as bubbly, not really pretty, not really smart, not a lot going on besides just being, well, all Liz, but she was salt of the earth, kind, caring, and great with kids. She was the only person who would willingly mind my two older brothers, who fought like hellcats and caused more trouble than the whole last generation of my family combined. People would privately lament to my parents that it was a shame Liz didn't have kids of her own. But Dad would just shake his head and say Liz liked it that way, that all the fun of looking after kids is being able to give them back to their parents. I guess she was like me, nice, but mediocre, lovely, but somehow forgettable when she wasn't doing something for you. But when Liz left us, I couldn't forget her. In hindsight, it was pretty weird timing that we had a big 40th birthday party for Liz right before she disappeared. She was radiant that night. She'd hired a local girl to do her hair and makeup, and it was honestly the first time I'd ever seen her look pretty. She'd even worn a push-up bra under a tight red dress, which flattered her very plump curves well enough that the neighbour's farmhand was spotted disappearing into the woolshed with her for a snog. In my dawning awareness, that gave a plain girl hope. If Auntie Liz could get a guy at 40, maybe things would turn out okay for me. Anyway, I couldn't forget how her pink cheeks, her eyes, her whole self glowed that night before Liz went to bed. She said it was the best birthday ever, and that she was very much looking forward to the next stage of her life. Would I have done anything different? If I had known, if I had realized what exactly that next stage was? The week after the party, Aunt Liz said she was going on a little holiday up north to visit some old school friends. She packed her things, she didn't honestly have that many, and drove her little orange Mini out onto the main road. And with a wave of one fleshy hand, she was gone. Nobody really thought much of it when she didn't call, because nobody rural had cell phones back then, and Liz was, as I said, somehow kind of forgettable when she wasn't right in front of you. When we hadn't had contact for 6 weeks, Dad tracked down the landline numbers for their old school buddies. They were surprised to hear from him. Liz had never arrived, so they had just assumed she'd cancelled her visit. No one had thought to check. I eavesdropped on the conversation, and it sounded for all the world like they had forgotten about Aunt Liz, too. From there, it became a missing person case. The local cops came and talked to all of us. The farmhand who'd been seen snogging her was briefly detained, then let go. Dad got grilled at length. Even my Hellion brothers were questioned thoroughly to see if this was one of their wild and dangerous pranks gone wrong. But everything was a dead end. Nobody knew where Liz was, or what had happened to her. The remains of her old Mini were found halfway across the country, burned out on a beach, on a derelict stretch of ragged, rocky coastline. The police assumed murder and combed the area for remains. But even the most expert divers couldn't conquer the incredible undertow and fast-shifting seabed of that coastline to look for evidence, so none was forthcoming. Eventually, the cops collectively shrugged and said that there was really nothing more they could do unless more information suddenly came to light. The locals knew nothing, no witnesses had come forward, and the trail was cold. As far as anyone knew, poor Aunt Liz had been murdered on some desolate beach, far away from her home. It didn't feel fair to me. She'd once mentioned wanting her remains buried on our farm, in the graveyard plot beside Grandma and Grandad. So, in my grief, I went into her room to look for something of hers to bury beside them. Like I said, Liz didn't have many things. Her room was pretty Spartan, and her wardrobe was mostly sensible farm stuff. There was one exception. She, like me, did like to read, and she had a pretty good collection of well-thumbed books. I think it's the escapism. Even the most mediocre girl can lose herself in the plot of some trashy romance novel. Imagine there's still hope of being swept off her feet by that handsome stable boy, his inexplicable yearning for chubby plain girls. So I set myself the task of going through the books, to find the right one to bury in the graveyard plot. Most of them were exactly what you'd expect, but some of them were racier than I was used to. I felt various parts of my body flushing and tingling as I read breathless prose about calloused hands touching the softest flesh of the protagonist. Okay, if I'm honest with myself, I might have got a little too invested in my project at that point, but that was also why I persisted going through her entire collection, until I found the ragged paperback from 1970, entitled Tawny Sands, and inside that trashy cardboard romance cover, I discovered not the tale of Tawny Sands, but some carefully hand-cut, stitched-in pages, a handwritten story in my aunt's rounded penmanship, Memoirs of a Long Pig. I read her story twice in a row, utterly gripped. Aunt Liz was no Stephen King. Heck, she wasn't even the Goosebumps guy, but her story was gripping and compelling, and I couldn't put it down, even if I hadn't known her. I think that would have been true. The gist of it was that Liz, when she was 16, had discovered that our family had a very long history of eating what she described as long pork. It's an Antipodean term, anglicized from the Pacific Islands, human meat. Like me, young Liz still had some hopes and dreams. In one of her many failed attempts to find a special talent, she'd taken up cooking as a hobby. Naturally, with our family's overabundance of meat, she'd scoured the freezers in the shed for ingredients, the racks of ribs and stacks of pork chops, butcher paper wrappings all neatly labeled with the first letter of the name of the animal they came from. She found familiar meat from Rodney, one of the pigs that had been recently slaughtered, emblazoned with an R in her father's strong, blocky lettering. There were cutlets labeled M for Mary, from one of the lambs she'd hand-reared, and F for Ferdinand, the steer they'd killed the month before, but she couldn't explain the many curious parcels of meat on one side of the huge freezer, all labeled J, at least, not until she took it all out and assembled it as well as she could on the scoured concrete floor of the killing shed, a big, frozen jigsaw puzzle without the box, her best attempt to discover what kind of beast the pieces had come from. The animal, she quickly realized, was a long pig, her own Aunt Jenny, who had died the month before, just after her 40th birthday. Fortunately, or perhaps not, for Liz, her father entered the shed right at that moment and realized his daughter had discovered the family secret. He sat down calmly on the lid of the freezer and explained to her that this was a long-running family tradition dating back to at least before his grandfather had been born. There are always people in life, Liz, he'd said, who won't really amount to much. They want to be useful, want to be more. They strive and they strive, trying job after job, hobby after hobby, trying to hit on something they're really good at, something that makes them special. Those people can waste their whole lives, chasing dreams that never come true. Eventually they die unfulfilled, knowing that all their time has been wasted, that what they leave behind will fade quickly. His voice was oddly gentle as he leaned down and patted one of the neatly wrapped cuts of Aunt Jenny, still sitting frozen on the shed floor. Your Aunt Jenny was one of those people. So was my Aunt Irene. He paused to gaze at his daughter, his next words peppered with emphasis. But you see, my sweet Liz, they did find a purpose in life. They did find a way to be special, and they left this world utterly certain of their gift. He stood up, stretched his back. Let me show you. Liz waited while my granddad meticulously stacked the meat back into the freezer, all but one J-marked parcel that looked for all the world like a thick venison steak. He took her back to the farmhouse and reverently unwrapped the deep red, heavily marbled meat to let it thaw. Then he laid it in the family's ancient cast-iron pan, basting it with butter and rosemary until a heavenly scent filled the kitchen, and Aunt Liz couldn't stop her mouth from watering. Just try it. Let her show you. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about. Even though she knew it was her aunt, Liz couldn't stop herself from taking that first bite. There was something transcendent about the smell, overriding her natural revulsion that this was human meat, not one of their farm animals. For the first time, she truly realized it. We're just another kind of animal. And weren't her memories of Mary the Lamb almost as fond as her memories of Aunt Jenny? Liz explained then, in her curly handwriting, the explosion of taste that had assaulted her when she tried the steak. It was tender. It was succulent. It was rich beyond imagining. The fats melted on her tongue, lingering somewhere between pork and beef. But oddly neither. The flavor of the meat defied identification, something familiar, yet not. But one thing she couldn't deny, it was the most delicious thing she had ever eaten. Tears dripped onto her plate, mingled with the juice, the grease, not grief, but a pure, real, giddy delight. You're tasting your aunt's love for this family, my granddad explained. Her entire life was carefully curated to eventually make unforgettable moments for us, just like this. This was her way of being special. This was the greatest gift she could possibly bring to our world. And because she realized that she died with not a single regret, she knew her life had purpose. She was perfectly, completely fulfilled. I felt those words. I felt them lodge in my own belly, settling uncomfortably deep. I knew Aunt Liz probably better than anyone else in the family. I'd seen how fucking happy she'd been on her 40th, how goddamn fulfilled she was, despite apparently being a nobody and achieving nothing. Somehow, in the space of a single day, she had gone from being a forgettable background character to becoming the main character, immortalizing herself in our family's history with her sacrifice, quite literally becoming part of all of us, forever. I went to the killing shed after I finished with the book. I looked inside the freezers, but there were no vacuum-sealed packages labeled L, no matter how deep I dug into the frozen stacks of plastic-wrapped flesh. Panicked now, not sure if I wanted to connect all the dots or unconnect them. I tried to think back over the last few months, recall any meals that had been unusually good. A few Sundays ago, we'd had a stew that really hit the spot and left me craving more, and I realized that the family had a really good night that night. My brothers behaved themselves. My parents didn't fight, and Grandma and Granddad had been there. Hadn't they looked far more expectant than they should have? I strained my brain, trying to recall if I'd seen the home kill bag on the kitchen bench, if I'd registered what letter it was. I knew it wasn't an L. I would have remembered if it was an L. And then it hit me, the memory, the connection, sizzling as if branded with a hot iron. It had been an E for Elizabeth, not for Edward the pig. I snorted at my own stupidity. Of course Liz was short for Elizabeth, and as I comprehended my lack of smarts, I felt something give inside me. I wasn't clever, and nothing would ever make me smart. I had no big talents. I wasn't beautiful, or even cute, and even if I had a million plastic surgeries, it still wouldn't fulfill me. It wouldn't be real. I was a Liz. I was a Jenny. I was whoever the first aunt had been. The aunt who had dedicated her life to making her flesh as delicious as possible, who had worked every damn minute to be the best long pig she could ever be. I wondered how many magical family evenings had been spent eating Aunt Jenny. How many glorious, satisfying, memorable dishes had been made out of her. And I wanted that. I wanted to finally know I had a purpose in life, one so simple and so easy to achieve. I wanted what Aunt Liz had. It's my 40th birthday today, and I'm so fucking excited. For the last 24 years, I've dedicated myself to this moment. I've eaten exactly what I needed to. I've exercised just enough, but not too much, to maintain that perfect balance of marbling versus tenderness. I've relaxed and meditated to keep all those amazing flavors inside of me. I've researched all the greatest meats in the world, from prime Angus beef to A5 Wagyu. I really think I may have outdone myself. I'm having my hair and makeup done at the local salon this afternoon, and I'm going to look so pretty. All prize piggy on show at the fair. I'm even going to have a big red ribbon in my hair, in memory of Aunt Liz. Maybe there'll be a cute boy I can snog in the wool shed. Maybe there won't. I don't really care, because the most important, most certain thing is that I'm going to be the most delicious long pig in the history of our entire family. I'm going to make everyone so damn happy, and I'm just so glad I can share my story with you all, instead of hiding it in a grubby book like poor Aunt Liz. My only real disappointment? That you won't get to taste me. Reader, I have loved my life. My long pork will be out of this world, once tasted, never, ever forgotten. Story 6. What child is this? We have been commanded to watch for the end of days. We watch for the man of sin, that son of perdition, the Antichrist, who will appear on the horizon like the morning star as dawn breaks. He will come, heralded by the false prophet. There will then be the final battle between good and evil, the blessed and the damned, the Christ and the Antichrist. Yet we do not know when all of this will come to pass. We must watch even unto our own end. Eternal rest grant unto her, O Lord. Fa, Abebe prayed. As the coffin was lowered into the earth, the sisters responded, and let perpetual light shine upon her. Amen. A white cross was planted at the head of the fresh grave, which was pointed toward the east, with a charcoal marker. I wrote the name of the deceased in large black letters, Sister Salome. With Senior Salome's death, the convent of Regina Passis, founded by Italian Roman Catholic missionaries outside Adigrat in the last century, was left with only 4 sisters, including myself and Far Bernardabebe, our priest-confessor, who traveled each Sunday from Addis Ababa to celebrate the holy sacrifice of the Mass and hear our confessions for the week. Senior Salome looked younger than her 33 years, but her personality made her seem older. She was devout in her prayers and penances, and fastidious in her work around the convent. Her purity and simplicity of heart shone through in everything she did. She was as comfortable working in the laundry as she was greeting the bishop of our diocese. She refused any adulation from the sisters, who endearingly referred to her as our saint, while she insisted she was a mere handmaid of the Lord, allowing his will to be done through her. Due to her genial and reserved nature, none of us noticed she was ill until she collapsed one day during morning prayer. It was All Hallows Eve when Far Abebe called Dr. Joseph Bayene, who examined Senior Salome and diagnosed her with an unspecified form of cancer. Due to its advanced stage, she was given a prognosis of less than a year. We were too preoccupied with ourselves to notice her illness until it was too late, and she was too humble to say anything about herself. Dr. Bayene said she should have been in extreme pain, but she must have offered her suffering to God in silence. She was moved from her cell to the infirmary as her illness progressed, and after 9 months of palliative care, Senior Salome surrendered her soul to God. As Seniors Catherine, Hannah, and Fatima walked Far Abebe to his car, I gazed upon the cross at the head of Senior Salome's grave. Have mercy, O Lord. Crossing myself, I returned to the convent, looking out of the barred window in the main corridor until Farah Abebe drove away. Taking a set of keys out of my pocket, I walked into the chapel, kneeling at the stairs leading to the sanctuary. I moved a bouquet of flowers to the side, uncovering a latch in the floor. I placed a key into the latch, which opened the door to the cellar. Grabbing one of the altar candles, I walked down the stairs into the cellar, which was located directly beneath the tabernacle above in the sanctuary. The sounds of soft whimpers broke the silence. Chains rattled from across the cellar. Through the candlelight, I saw a woman, heavy with child, chained to the wall. Leaning forward, I held the candle closer to her face. Sister Salome. I have not been entirely truthful in my recollection of the past 9 months. After Senior Salome collapsed during morning prayer on All Hallows Eve, for Abebe indeed called Dr. Bayene, who examined her, but he did not find she was ill in the conventional sense. She was pregnant. When the sisters and I were informed Senior Salome was pregnant, the 4 of us were in disbelief. How shall this be? Dr. Bayene said she was at least 8 weeks along, which meant the child was conceived by September. Had she been assaulted? Not likely. She would have told us. How else? I could not fathom she would break her vows. But while I racked my mind for an answer, I remembered she was sent to Addis Ababa in August with a delegation of priests and religious brothers to greet a newly ordained bishop who was visiting our country as part of a larger trip to East Africa. Entering her cell, I walked to Senior Salome's bedside. She looked away from me in shame, but I grabbed her face with my hand and forced her to look at me. I pointed to her abdomen. Who is the father of this child? I'm sorry, Sister Mariam. I slapped her in the face before she could continue blubbering. Who is the father? The bishop, she confessed. It's the bishop's child. Our bishop? No, she answered. The visiting bishop. She cried as she said she could not clearly remember what had transpired between her and the bishop, but I did not know whether or not to believe her. Who could say she was not lying? I released her face from my grip and began to walk to the door. I came to a sudden stop as she exclaimed, "He did what he was told to do." I turned around slowly. What? The bishop, Signor, Salome said. He said he did what he was told to do. What did he mean? I don't know, she conceded. He didn't tell me. All I can remember is he apologized, but said he only did what he was told to do. He said I was his virgin. I don't know what any of it means. Could it be? As I thought about her situation in further detail, I slowly came to the realization that the prophecies of the Lady of Adwa could be coming to pass as she said they would. When I entered the convent, I was one of many young women who made the same decision after we heard of the messages of the Lady of Adwa, a series of apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary to 3 sisters who lived in a village near the historic city of Adwa. The visionaries, Elizabeth, Joanna, and Felicita, were watching over their flock of sheep when an extraordinarily bright light shone above a tree. The girls cautiously approached the tree when they were able to see the figure of a woman in the light, dressed in a white gown with a matching sash and white mantle. The woman appeared to be floating above the dead tree's withered branches, her hands clasped together in prayer. Elizabeth and Joanna heard her ethereal voice, while Felicita could only see her lips moving. The girls wondered in fear what was happening when the woman began to speak. "Do not be afraid," she said. "I come from heaven." "Who are you?" Elizabeth asked. "My children, I am the ever-Virgin Mary, Mother of your Lord and God," she answered. "I have come to tell you something of the greatest importance." The sisters drew closer to the woman, who had now identified herself as the Blessed Virgin Mary, as she continued to speak. "Do you love the Lord our God? My daughters, if you do, listen to what I have to say. The world is in grave danger if men continue to afflict the Lord our God with their sins. He will inflict a chastisement on all mankind if his wrath is not appeased by prayers and sacrifices by souls such as yours." The sisters' parents were troubled by what their daughters told them. The girl's father swore them to secrecy, while the girl's mother informed their parish priest about the alleged apparition. The parish priest in turn informed the bishop of their diocese, who authorized him to conduct an investigation into Elizabeth, Joanna, and Felicita, and their alleged messages from God through the Blessed Virgin Mary. I was enthralled by the Lady of Adwa and her message of prayer and sacrifice. It gave me a sense of purpose. I felt the call to become a religious sister. I wanted to dedicate the rest of my life to my Lord and my God. As I prepared to leave my home to enter the convent, the Tadessa sisters had 2 more visions of the Lady. During the second vision, the Lady said, "My daughters, you know that to be worthy of the Lord our God, you must be fastened to his cross with 3 nails: poverty, chastity, and obedience. Of these, obedience is the most important. Listen only to me and do as I say. It is almost time for the one to come, whose birth will be the beginning of the end of the world." "The one to come?" Joanna asked. "The Antichrist," the Lady clarified. "The one to come will be born of a false virgin, unfaithful to her spouse, who shall conceive in her accursed womb, by help of the enemy, with a man of God." "What will he do?" Elizabeth asked. "Tremble with fear. My daughters, tremble with fear. For all of your sins, the Lord our God will hand mankind over to that same enemy, the ancient serpent, who will work through his false prophet and his Antichrist to claim as many souls as he can." "Oh, Mother," Joanna exclaimed, "what can we do?" "Pray, my daughters, pray very much. Offer yourselves as sacrifices to your Lord and God. Appease his wrath before it is too late." In her third appearance, the Lady of Adwa appeared to the Tadesse sisters, who were joined by their mother and aunts, as well as friends and neighbors. The girls' eyes glazed over as a bright light descended from the sky and rested above the dead tree. After an hour and a half, the girls came back to their senses. However, they were not as peaceful as they had been following the previous apparitions. Elizabeth and Felicita looked visibly shaken, while Joanna was sobbing. The girl's mother asked them a question. "What did the Lady say?" Joanna and Felicita looked to Elizabeth to answer their mother. "It is too late," Elizabeth answered. "After I moved away to Regina Passis, I kept all of the messages of the lady in my heart, but I did not know how the official investigation into the alleged apparitions concluded, whether they were declared supernatural or not supernatural, because I was cloistered from the rest of the world as a postulant in the convent. Sister Mariam, I was brought back to the present moment by Senior Salome." "Sister Mariam," Senior Salome repeated. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking, should I tell her? It would be better if you were dead." She frowned as I thought about what I said. What if she were dead? I walked back to her bedside. "Now," I whispered, "you will listen only to me and do as I say. We were able to dissuade Dr. Bayane from reporting his findings to Farah Abebe. He helped us to concoct that story that Senior Salome in fact had cancer with a poor prognosis. She was moved to the infirmary when she started to show, which we hid from Farah Abebe when he visited. We acted as if she was really dying, and as her due date drew closer, we made a plan to stage her death and move her to the cellar for the birth of her child. Her child, the Antichrist, who was prophesied in the scriptures. If any man shall say to you, 'Lo, here is Christ,' or 'There,' do not believe him, for there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch as to deceive even the elect. Behold, I have told it to you beforehand." Or Matthew 24, 23, 25. "Sister Mariam." "Senior," Salome slurred as she said my name. Her chains rattled as she sat up as far as she possibly could. "We came to the decision to chain her after Senior. Fatima suggested she could try to intentionally hurt herself or her child." "Senior." Salome squinted in the candlelight, her face aglow with its flame. "Has Father Abebe left?" "Yes," I answered. "How do you feel?" "It is almost time." She held her belly as she complained of hunger and thirst. I called for Senior Catherine, who walked down into the cellar, carrying a tray with a bowl of oatmeal and a glass of water. Senior Salome ate and drank, aided by Senior Catherine, as if this was her last meal. After Senior Salome finished eating, Senior Catherine took the tray and its contents as she and I walked up from the cellar together, leaving Senior Salome below in the darkness. I locked the latch and covered it with the bouquet of flowers before I directed the sisters to return to their assigned duties. On the following day, I knelt in front of the marker for Senior Salome's supposed grave, praying to God for guidance. Were we in league with evil for allowing the birth of the Antichrist? Would we not be justified in ending his life? Or was it the will of God that the Antichrist be born? I did not know. I could possibly never know. With a sigh, I crossed myself, and I heard the roar of distant thunder. We were due for a storm. Lightning struck and thunder clapped as I prayed evening prayer with Seniors Catherine, Hannah, and Fatima in the chapel on a sweltering evening in June. As we concluded with the sign of the cross, we heard screaming coming from beneath our feet. Hannah and Fatima went to the infirmary, while Senior Catherine and I descended into the cellar. Senior Salome was still screaming, a loud, piercing scream, and as we drew closer to her, we saw her water had broken. It was time. Sears, Hannah and Fatima called for us from above, indicating they prepared the infirmary for Senior Salome. Senior Catherine unchained her, and we led her upstairs to the chapel, but she collapsed on the steps of the sanctuary. It was apparent she could no longer walk. "Sister Salome," Senior Catherine pleaded, "it's only a little further." In response, Senior Salome screamed as she held onto her belly, her contractions getting stronger. She would not be able to make it to the infirmary. "Bring the supplies here, Sister Catherine," I directed. "What?" Senior Catherine balked. "She can't give birth in the chapel." "Bring the supplies here," I demanded. Senior Catherine went to get the supplies from the infirmary, while Senior Hana pulled me aside as Senior. Fatima looked after Senior. Salome. What? The grave. Senior. Hana trailed off. Senior. Salome's grave. What about it? It's open. I followed Senior. Hana to the main corridor, where we saw through the barred window that Senior. Salome's supposed grave had turned into a mess of mud and muck. I directed Senior, Hana to help Senior, Fatima in the chapel, and I went outside in the storm. I struggled to see through the blinding rain, but I was finally able to see the white cross had blown away, while the coffin was exposed through the sludge. It was open. I was able to see the carcass of the hyena I slaughtered and placed in the casket to avoid suspicion about an empty coffin. As I looked intently at the grave, I believed I saw shadows out in the storm. But before I could think about that any further, I heard Senior Hana call for me, and I ran back inside. In the chapel, Senior Salome was laid back on the steps of the sanctuary, her legs spread, while Seniors Catherine and Fatima knelt by her right side, placing bands of cloth, scissors, and a basin of water to the side to assist her in labor. I knelt in front of Senior Salome, while Senior Hana joined Seniors Catherine and Fatima, who were holding up Senior Salome's habit. I recalled a specific part of the second appearance of the Lady of Adwa to the Tadessa sisters. That false virgin shall bring forth before the tabernacle of your Lord and God, defiling what was once holy. Her son will be evil incarnate, screaming and shrieking in front of the altar of his God and yours. He will be brought forth in a temple of God, sitting in the sanctuary as if he were God. With a deep breath, I started to assist Senior Salome. Lord, have mercy. I thought I heard thunderclap while Senior Salome screamed in agony, but I noticed that it sounded similar to a gunshot. Unable to leave Senior Salome in the midst of labor, I told Senior Catherine to see if the doors to the convent were closed. She exchanged a glance with Seniors Hana and Fatima, but she stood up and walked to the chapel doors. Before she opened the doors, a bolt of lightning struck outside, flooding the chapel with its bright light. In the flash, the doors were opened by 3 women, all of whom were in nuns' habits, and one of whom shot Senior Catherine directly in the head. I was unable to react before Senior Hana stood up and immediately was shot twice in the chest, collapsing beside me, choking on her own blood. I could not move at all. I was petrified. Senior Fatima screamed, abandoning me with Senior Salome, but she was unable to make it far before she was shot in the back and fell to the chapel floor. With a cry, Senior Salome brought forth her child in one final pang. From her blood and pain comes our destruction. She was ashen and pale, and she was unable to even see her baby boy before she fell unconscious, lifeless and limp, on the steps of the sanctuary. She was bleeding heavily, terrified. I tried to focus my attention on her and her newborn, ignoring our dead sisters, as well as the 3 veiled women who murdered them, even as they surrounded us. I held the baby carefully in my arms as I stood up. I looked around at the 3 women, one of whom raised her gun to me, and she gestured for me to hand the baby to her. I was paralyzed by fear. What should I do? I looked down at the newborn, as well as the hemorrhaging Senior Salome, before the woman stepped closer to me with her gun pointed at my forehead. After a moment of hesitation, I handed the baby to the woman, and the 3 of them spoke with each other in a language I did not know. Vergine Madre, la falsa profetessa, Michele. The 3 women looked at me one more time before one of them drew her gun and shot Senior Salome in the head. Shaking in fear, I looked down to the floor as the 3 women exited the chapel, leaving me with 4 corpses, as well as my habit and hands and face covered in blood and viscera. In the distance, I could hear something through the storm, a baby's cry. Story 7. Call of the Tunnels. It was Josh's idea to explore the tunnels. He found the entrance one night on his walk back from the recreation center to the dorms. Emily, Greg, Amy and I were sitting around after lunch in the Oakland Center, or the OC as we usually called it, avoiding our educational responsibilities when Josh joined us and brought it up. "What's up, losers?" Josh said, snagging a chair and joining our group. Josh and I were in our second year as roommates, having hit it off since freshman move-in day. He was much more outgoing than me, and I'm sure I wouldn't have had nearly as much fun without him around. It is already a big step being away from the comfort of home for the first time, and being forced to live with someone you've never met could make the experience even more challenging. We were lucky that we got along so well. "We're thinking about going to the basketball game tonight. You down?" Greg asked him. "I've got a better idea," Josh said. "Let's meet in our room at 8 tonight. Wear tennis shoes, dress warm, and bring a flashlight." "What are you making us do this time?" Amy asked. "Don't worry about it. When have I steered you wrong?" "Have you already forgotten the Halloween party last October?" said Greg. "We drove for like 2 hours to get there, and there were only 10 people there, including us. Trust me, this is going to be amazing. See you at 8, he said and walked away. Emily looked at her phone. "I guess we have a few hours to kill before whatever adventure Josh has planned for us this time." "Most of the time he's taken us to fun things," I said. "The Halloween party was admittedly terrible, and the camping trip sucked with all that rain. But remember how much fun we had at the carnival? Greg, you finally almost got laid that night." Amy laughed. "That donkey really liked you. Didn't it take 4 workers to get him off you?" "Haha, very funny," Greg said. Greg and Emily had been dating since high school and were sure to be married once they graduated. Amy was Emily's best friend, and Elle had a crush on her. I was working up the courage to ask her out, but waiting for the right time. Josh told me that there was no right time for anything, and you just had to be brave and go for it. But that's easier said than done. "Emily and I will pick up snacks for later. You better get to your accounting class, John. You're already 5 minutes late," Amy said to me. "Time value of money week," I said. "No way I'm sitting through 2 more hours of the same examples over and over while the future communications majors ask 100 questions." "Hey, I'm majoring in communications," Amy said. "And you're great at math, right?" I said. "Shut up," she said, and playfully slapped my arm while walking away. After they left, Greg asked, "When are you finally going to ask her out? You know she likes you, right?" I had thought she might like me too, but that little bit of self-doubt would grow any time I felt like I was about to ask her on a date. We hung out a lot as a group and always had a great time together. I was worried that it would make it awkward if it didn't work out and I'd mess up our friend group. "What if I'm waiting for you to screw it up with Emily?" I replied. Greg ignored my attempt at humor. "I've overheard her talking to Emily about you. Trust me, she likes you. Grow a pair and ask her out." We continued our conversation as we headed back to my room for video games and a few beers before our unknown adventure. Josh entered our room around 7 with a brown paper bag and set it on his bed. Greg and I paused our game, looking over to see what he had. "Where are we going tonight?" I asked. "I'll tell you after we have our Boone's race," said Josh. "What the hell is a Boone's race?" asked Greg. Josh pulled out 3 bottles of Boone's Farm and handed one to each of us. "First one done wins. Ready, set, go!" he yelled as he twisted off the cap and began chugging the $3 wine bottle. Greg and I looked at each other, shrugged our shoulders, and quickly opened our bottles and followed suit. Josh finished first, followed by me and then Greg. That was probably a bad idea, Greg said after an extended burp. "You'll be fine," Josh said, and grabbed a blue light for each of us from the mini fridge. While we drank our beers, he regaled us with a long, overly detailed but entertaining story of how he found the entrance to the tunnels underneath our school. Both Greg and I thought it sounded like an interesting way to spend our Friday night. We went back to playing video games, and soon enough, the girls knocked on the door and let themselves in. Amy came over and sat next to me, noticing the 3 empty bottles on the table. "You couldn't save any for us?" Josh went back to his paper bag and pulled out an actual bottle of wine. "Don't worry, we saved the good stuff for you." He grabbed 2 red Solo cups and poured a generous amount for Amy and Emily, and then filled them in on the night's plans. After the bottle of wine and a few more beers were gone, Josh made sure we each had a flashlight, and we put on our coats and headed outside. It was a mild night for April, with the temperature in the 40s. Amy huddled close to me as we walked through the grass toward the student center, all of us with a nice buzz, anticipating the fun adventure we were about to embark on. "The entrance is over there," Josh said, pointing to a small section of pine trees and bushes. The night was still, and there wasn't anyone else in the area. We looked around to be sure no one was watching and hurried behind the bushes. There was a square metal door about the size of a manhole cover on top of a cement slab in the middle of the bushes. Josh opened it up and said, "Ladies first." "No way am I going first down there," Emily said as she looked at the ladder leading down into the darkness. "I'll go first," Amy said as she grabbed my shoulder and hoisted herself onto the cement. She smiled at me and excitedly said, "This is going to be fun." She turned on her flashlight and slowly went down the ladder. I went down next, followed by Josh, Emily, and lastly Greg, who closed the door above him before climbing the rest of the whale down the rungs. We got to the bottom, and the rest of us turned on our flashlights and looked down the 2 paths we could take. "How far did you go when you found this place?" Greg asked. "I went down this way a little," Josh said as he pointed to the right of the ladder. "I was only down here for a few minutes and thought it would be more fun for all of us to go." "Admit it. You were scared of being alone in the dark. I saw that nightlight in your dorm room," Amy chuckled. "That's for John. He needs to be able to find his pacifier if it falls out of his mouth," Josh joked back. Then he led us down the tunnel. The walls were rounded and grey, and there was a tiny bit of standing water in the ground. We walked for about 10 minutes before our flashlights illuminated a wall in front of us, with a path leading to the left and the right. "Which way should we go?" Emily asked. "John, why don't you and Amy go to the right and we'll take the path to the left? We can see which way looks more promising and meet back here in 10 minutes. Greg winked at me and grabbed Emily's hand and nudged Josh. Josh reached into his backpack, grabbed 2 beers and lightly tossed them to me. Then he handed Greg and Emily a beer each before opening one for himself and heading down the path to the left. After we started walking down the other path, Amy said, "If I didn't know any better, I'd think they were trying to get us alone together." I opened the beers, gave her one and took a big swig from mine. "Well, there is something I've been meaning to ask you." Amy stepped closer and looked into my eyes. I hesitated for a moment and then leaned in towards her. She grabbed onto me and we kissed. Then she leaned back and smiled. "What were you going to ask me?" she said, biting her lower lip and looking in my eyes. "I can't remember," I said as we set our drinks down, and she pressed her body into mine. We held each other tight and continued to kiss, our tongues playfully dancing in each other's mouths. We were suddenly jarred out of our embrace by a loud crash. I initially thought it was Josh or Greg trying to scare us, before realizing the sound came from further down the path we were supposed to explore. "What was that?" Amy asked as the smile faded from her face. I aimed my flashlight down the path, making shadows dance across the tunnel walls. I took a few steps forward and Amy grabbed my hand, trying to pull me back. "Let's get the others before we see what that was. I'll just go a little further and see if I can see anything." The high of the kiss and the buzz from the alcohol gave me extra courage as I slowly walked down the path. Another loud noise echoed through the tunnel from further ahead. I turned around to check on Amy and jumped as her hand grabbed my arm. "I didn't realize you were following me," I said. She let out a nervous laugh. I didn't mean to scare you. I hope we don't get in trouble for being down here. Let's go find the others. I nodded in agreement. We headed back toward where we had split from the others. After a few steps, we heard a metal door slam shut. It sounded like it came from the area where we had entered. We stopped and she whispered, "Our phones. Let's try to reach the others." We both pulled out our phones. There was no signal down here, and the university Wi-Fi network didn't show up. My phone was on vibrate already, and Amy quickly silenced hers. We listened intently in the hopes that whoever was down here with us was going the other way. Amy grabbed my hand and we hurried further down the tunnel. I placed my hand over my flashlight to provide just enough light so we could see where we were going. "Look, there's a door up ahead," Amy said. The door was slightly ajar, but it wouldn't budge when I pushed it. I could hear the footsteps growing louder, and then it sounded like they were running. "Something must be blocking the door," Amy said. We began pushing together, but couldn't get it to go any further. I turned around and was blinded by a bright light shining on us. "Hey, what are you doing down here?" a deep voice yelled. We held our hands up to shield our eyes, and Amy said, "We're sorry. We didn't know we weren't supposed to be here." Then I heard Josh's laughter. "I got you guys good," he said. "You ass," Amy said. After Josh lowered the light, we could see Greg and Emily coming up behind him. "Sorry," Greg said. "We told him it was a stupid idea. But you know Josh." When Josh finally stopped laughing, he said, "At least I got you two to finally kiss each other." "That was before you scared us," I said. Amy turned back around to the door. "What do you think is back here?" she asked. "Something is blocking it." Greg walked over to help me and Amy push on the door, and we finally got it to open a little further. We took turns squeezing through the opening and found ourselves in a big room. There was a desk in the corner and a couple cabinets. "Maybe this is part of the basement of one of the buildings," said Emily. "From the direction we went, I think we might be under O'Dowd." "I think you're right," said Josh. He pointed his flashlight over by the door. "What the hell?" We walked over to him and saw the giant mound of dirt and broken concrete that was leaning against the door. There was a hole in the wall behind the pile. "We have to go in there," said Josh with a big grin on his face. The top of the hole was about chest height, so we'd have to crouch to get in. "No way," said Greg. Josh aimed the light in the hole. "Look, there's plenty of room in there. Let's see where it goes." I looked at Amy. She shrugged her shoulders and said, "Why not? We'll always wonder where it goes if we don't check it out," said Josh. "Don't be a giant." "Come on, Greg. Let's go," said Emily, cutting Josh off. "Where's your sense of adventure?" Greg sighed. "Fine, let's go." Josh went first. Amy and I followed behind, and Emily and Greg were at the end. The tunnel was well lit from all of our flashlights, and we only had to crouch for about 10 feet before it opened up into a bigger tunnel like the ones we first went into. Although this one looked much older, and the walls had rust stains all over them. "It stinks in here," Amy said. "My bad," said Josh. "I shouldn't have had those bean burritos from the cafeteria earlier." "No, it isn't that. Well, maybe it partly is, but something else smells terrible," said Amy. "Yeah, I smell it too," I said. "I think it is a dead animal." "Let's keep going," said Josh. "Maybe it will get better once we get past it." I covered my nose with my shirt as we continued on through the tunnel. The smell grew progressively worse, and I was ready to turn around when Josh said, "I think we found the smell." We all aimed our flashlights where Josh was pointing and unfortunately got a good view of the large animal carcass. "What is that?" Emily asked. I didn't think any of us were going to be able to answer that question as I stared at the pile of bones and decaying flesh. It looked about the size of an elk, but you'd have to go over 200 miles north to see one. "Maybe it's a bear," said Greg. "How and why would a bear be down here?" said Emily. It's way too big to be any other animal that lives around here, said Greg. Maybe it's more than one animal, said Amy. Aren't those all leg bones? She said, pointing to a few different spots in the pile. Josh started counting. I think I see 9 legs and I can't even tell what that is. He pointed to a large rotting appendage. Let's keep going. I can't take this smell anymore, said Amy. We walked quickly away from the pile and only slowed down once the stench had begun to fade away. The tunnel continued for a long time, and Josh handed us each another beer while we continued on our way. Look, there's another hole in the wall, said Amy. Let's check it out before we keep going. Josh aimed his light in the hole. It just seems to keep going, he said. Emily went first this time, followed by Greg, Josh, Amy, and then me. After a long walk down the dirt-covered walls, we ended up in a large open room. The ceiling was higher tooth than I expected, especially with how low the tunnel ceilings had been. I stayed with Amy while she searched around the room. The floor was dirt, but the walls looked to be solid. I aimed my light at the ceiling and thought I saw something move. "Did you see that?" I asked. "See what?" replied Amy. I moved my flashlight around the ceiling again. "There," I said as I caught more movement. Amy pointed hers up there too. "What is it?" she asked. I moved my light back and forth on the ceiling and saw that something was carved into the concrete. It appeared to shift and move when the light ran over it. "It looks like some kind of symbol," I said. "It must be a trick of the light, but it really looks like it is moving." "I see it now," shouted Amy. "That one looks like an eye." I saw the one she was looking at. It looked like a closed eye with long eyelashes around it. There were other carvings that looked like stars, and some with shapes or figures that were hard to describe. "I wonder what this does," Josh said. I heard a loud clang followed by the sound of metal grinding against metal. The ceiling began to shift and distort as the room started to shake. "That eye just opened," said Amy. I looked up again and the eye was moving around. It even blinked a couple of times before it seemed to focus directly on Josh. The other shapes began to glow and shift, seeming to float just below the ceiling. The stars got brighter and the ceiling got blacker, so it now looked like the night sky. "I think those are constellations," I said. "Look, there's Cassiopeia and Perseus over there." "Nerd!" shouted Josh. "Just kidding. That's pretty cool." It felt like we were standing in a giant planetarium, with the stars floating and moving just above us. If I reached above me, it looked like I could touch the stars. We were all mesmerized by it and no one said a word. I felt like I was floating through space. The eye was looking around again and seemed to focus on each one of us for a minute before it closed again. Some of the shapes appeared to move closer, and the sky-like ceiling began moving faster. Unknown constellations passing over us. I began to feel dizzy and had to close my eyes. When I opened my eyes again, I was startled to find myself in my dorm room lying on the floor next to Amy. As I got used to my sudden change in surroundings, I realized I was about to pee my pants. I got up and ran in the bathroom and just barely made it. While I was still going, I heard a knock at the door. It was Amy. "Hey, you almost done in there? I really have to pee." "Almost," I said, although it seemed like it was never going to end. Finally, I was finished. The door opened up while I was washing my hands and Amy rushed in. "Sorry, I can't hold it anymore. Too much beer and wine last night, I guess," she said. "It was the same for me," I said before stepping out and giving her some privacy. I checked my phone to see what time it was, but it wouldn't turn on. After plugging it into the charger on my desk, I looked around and noticed Josh wasn't in the room. Amy stepped back into the room and asked, "What time is it?" I looked over at my alarm clock. "It's past 2 in the afternoon," I said. "Really? I can't believe we slept that long." I didn't remember coming back here last night. However, I was afraid to tell Amy. The booze race was probably a bad idea, but I didn't feel blackout drunk. "Hey, do Do you know how we got here last night? Amy asked. I smiled. Oh, good. You don't remember either. I remember everything until we were in that room. A smile came across Amy's face. The stars and glowing images came back to me and I closed my eyes. They showed up so clearly in my mind and I started feeling dizzy. John, Amy shouted. I jumped. What is it? I've been calling your name for like a minute and you wouldn't respond, she said. Sorry, I was thinking about the room. She looked a little concerned. Let's go find Greg and Emily. Or Josh. Maybe Greg and Emily will remember. Good idea, I said. Let me see if anyone texted. I turned on my phone and waited for it to power up. When the lock screen came up, I was about to enter my PIN when I noticed the date. It's Sunday, I said. What Sunday? She asked. No, I mean today is Sunday, I said. Let me see. She walked over to me. What happened to Saturday? I don't know. I looked at my phone. Nothing from Josh. I'll text him while we head over to Greg's. No wonder we had to pee so bad, she said. We walked over to Greg's room on the other end of the hall. There was no answer when we knocked a few times and the door was locked. Amy and Emily's room was on the floor below. We were both quiet on the walk to her room. I was sure Amy was as confused and concerned as I was. Amy tried the handle. It turned and she slowly opened the door. Emily. Emily and Greg were both lying on the floor asleep. Emily, Greg. I called while giving Greg a shake. He started awake. Hey, what are you doing here? Then he looked around. Wait, what are we doing here? Before I could answer, Greg's eyes went wide and he got up and sprinted to the bathroom. Emily woke up slower, but then quickly got up and burst through the bathroom door. I looked over at Amy and she and I shared a laugh. When they both came out, Amy said, Hate to break it to you, but it's Sunday. No, it's Saturday, said Greg. Don't you remember? We went to the tunnels last night and saw that room and then He looked confused. Look, it's Sunday. I showed him my phone. Does anyone remember how we got to our rooms Friday night? Everyone shook their heads no. Have you talked to Josh? Asked Emily. Haven't seen him, I said. He hasn't responded to my text yet. I'll give him a call. After opening my phone app, I noticed a bunch of missed calls from Josh. They were all from late Friday night and into early Saturday morning. Anyone remember what time we found that room last night? Friday night, I asked. Maybe around 11, Emily guessed. Josh started calling around midnight that night, I said. I tapped on my voicemail. That's a lot of messages. He left voicemails. Play them, said Amy. I put my phone on speaker and played the first message. It was silent for the first minute. I was about to close it when I heard a faint sound. It was a barely audible hum. The tone of it was so low and deep that I could feel it in my head. The sound began to vibrate stronger in my head and was becoming painful. The glare of white lights appeared in my peripheral vision and I felt weak. Voices started to speak on the message, but I stopped it before I fell to the ground. It took a few moments for me to get back to normal. Turn it off, shouted Emily. It hurts. Why won't you stop it? She was holding onto the sides of her head. Greg ran over to her. It's not playing anymore. What's wrong? Emily had her eyes closed and was still holding her head. She dropped to her knees and leaned forward onto the floor. Greg dropped down beside her. Then suddenly she stood back up. That was weird, wasn't it? She laughed. Let's go find Josh. Emily walked to the door. I looked at Amy and shared the confusion I saw on her face. Emily, are you okay? Amy asked. My head hurt too when the voicemail was playing. I'm fine, Emily said with a smile. Come on, let's go. She walked out the door and Greg followed her. Amy grabbed my arm. What the hell was that? Amy said. She looked like she was in so much pain. And then she was fine. That was weird, I said. We had to move fast to keep up with Emily as we went outside and through campus towards the woods. Emily, do you know where Josh is? I shouted up ahead to her. She turned around and said, "Of course I do," before trekking on ahead. We didn't say much else while we followed her. The whole walk, she never hesitated in the direction she went. "There it is," Emily shouted before running ahead. We all ran after her and watched as she went into a section of thick bushes. She kneeled down and frantically brushed away the dirt. A handle was now exposed. "Help me open it," she said. I was scared of what was happening, but I really wanted to see that room again and to know if Josh was okay. I grabbed the handle with Emily and helped her pull it open. Emily went down first and I quickly followed her. Amy gave me a weird look as I noticed her and Greg hadn't followed me over. I went down the ladder anyway and into the tunnel. "Do you feel it?" Emily asked. She pressed her cheek to one of the walls and closed her eyes. "It is calling us back." She grabbed my arm and pulled me. "Let's go." When I hesitated, she said, "Don't you remember it?" I'd forgotten about it when we woke up, but it all came back to me when you played the voicemail. I still couldn't remember what happened, but I also couldn't stop thinking about the room. "Don't worry about it," she said. "It will all make sense soon." She smiled and motioned for me to follow her. I looked back and saw Amy and Greg coming down the ladder, but I couldn't wait for them. I had to go with Emily. We ran down the tunnel and stopped at an opening in the wall. I heard some yelling behind me, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. The glow of the room drew me in, and all other sounds went away. I closed my eyes and felt the light beaming down on me from the ceiling. My body was so light, and I could swear I was floating off the ground. I opened my eyes and looked at the stars moving around me. The low hum I had heard in the voicemail reverberated throughout the room. It sounded so beautiful. I opened my eyes and saw Emily and Josh staring up at the ceiling. There was blackness all around us. The only light was from the tiny stars above us. It felt like I was spinning around. Then I felt something in my head, a strong pressure behind my eye. It felt like a bad migraine I had before, except without the pain. I looked over at Josh again, and he seemed so far away, I could barely even see him. "Josh!" I shouted, but he went further and further away. My eyes darted around for Emily. She wasn't there. I couldn't see Josh anymore either. My skin felt clammy and I kept looking around. The light faded away and I was left in complete darkness. "Hello, Josh, Emily," I said to no response. It felt like something was watching me. I looked all around in the darkness until I saw a faint light in the distance. I don't know how much time passed, but it felt like hours. My feelings had quickly changed from awe to complete terror. Was I going to be stuck here forever? The light I had seen grew bigger and transformed into the eye we had seen Friday night. It became difficult to breathe as it stared at me. My thoughts turned to death and destruction. I saw my friends burning alive before my eyes, screaming in pain as their skin melted off. My mouth opened to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. Then I was suddenly soaking wet from freezing cold water. The bright light stung my eyes and I was shivering from the cold. "He's awake." It was Amy. She slowly came into focus, and I found myself lying in a bathtub of freezing cold water. I jumped up, nearly slipping and falling before Amy caught my arm. Once I was steady, she wrapped me up in a couple towels. "We didn't think you'd ever wake up," she said. "What do you remember?" "The room," I said. I remember going back into the room. Josh and Emily were there. My body continued to shiver and my head was hazy. I sat down on Amy's bed and closed my eyes. I could suddenly feel myself back in the room. The low rumbling sound I had heard in the voicemail filled my ears. When I focused on the noise, it began to sound like words. Well, not quite words, but sounds. My head started hurting and I could feel the words inside my brain. An image started appearing in my mind. It was a vast ocean with water all along the horizon. Stars shone down from the night sky. Something big was emerging from the water. The giant shape neared the surface and I felt water splash into my face. I looked around and I was in Amy's room. Greg was holding an empty cup of water. "Man, where the hell were you?" he asked. "You zoned out again and we couldn't get your attention at all." That night, Greg went back to his room and Amy and I slept in her bed. She fell asleep quickly, but I couldn't get the images of my friends burning out of my mind. Story 8. A candle in the dark. Ever since I could remember myself, I was a cowardly person. Or, to formulate it in a lighter tone, I am prone to be scared. Living in a rural area with few kids around my age to play with, we all knew each other in the town, and our families were either relatives or friends. My childhood friends had noticed my fidgeting when we would go to darker places, the quickening of my breaths when entering an abandoned townhouse, or when going to the farms late at night to play hide and seek. While they picked on me from time to time, they didn't give me a hard time about it. They understood also that the world is dangerous enough, so having one person in your group who is too careful, keep the careless people in line. I was very good in games, throwing stones with precision on target cans, chasing, dodgeball. However, I was exceptionally good at hide and seek, and being a scrawny little dude, was easy for me to fit in unlikely places. During the day I would go exploring on my own, and at night I knew where the best hiding spots were that were not too dark or far from an inhabited house. Yet I could feel the fear once in a while. A sudden gust of wind whistling through broken branches would be enough to make me very scared. When I was around 8, I told my parents about my fear of the dark. They initially told me that I think too much of it, but as the months went by and they saw my everyday efforts to avoid dark corners and always having the lights turned on in my room, they grew concerned. They asked me on whether I had a negative experience in my past while being in the dark. I didn't. I always had this fear that, in the dark, no one is truly alone, that something is there always, waiting to drop my guard. My grandmother, who happened to be in the house during this conversation, she was looking at me concerned and, at the same time, nodding at me, as in a way to tell me that my concerns were valid. In the following years, I put a lot of effort in my academics and fitness. I signed up to a couple of self-defense classes that boosted my confidence in myself, although I still remained thin and short. This fear of the dark, while it lessened, it never vanished even when I finished high school and was about to study at a college a bit too far from my homely town. My grandmother, bless her soul, had visited us that fateful morning when I was preparing to move to the uni dorms. She asked my parents that she wanted to talk to me in private, and while initially surprised, they did as she asked and went to carry my stuff in their car. "My boy," she said with a calm tone, her brown eyes losing their usual joyful gleam, living alone in a dark, cold city is different. I worked in that city and other cities for many years to bring food on the table. You dear grandfather also was a hard-working man. He taught me how to protect myself. I never needed to use what he taught me. But he also knew that there was one more thing that made me scared. "Yes," she admitted as I looked at her surprised. "The dark," she continued as I didn't interrupt her, "has always been a fear for me. I never had anything bad happen to me in it, but it always made me wary. You know how some stories go. Demons, ghouls, ghosts, etc. We often hear that the true monster under the bed is human. But what if it actually isn't?" I nodded at her, my hands trembling a bit. Even going to a psychologist for this didn't help. Session after session, my fears got little, yet they still are there. She nodded at that. She gently took my trembling hands in hers. She was trembling a bit too. "Maybe I have an issue or a curse that I passed it down on you. My darling Lucas, we all have problems. However, a few years ago, when your grandfather was in his deathbed for over 2 weeks, he told me to keep the lights open when it was night, every single night. He never liked to have them on next to his bed, which is why I had a night lamp always on my side of the bed and not his. Right there, though, in that hospital room, he asked me that. I did so. He then told me he could sometimes see shadows in the hospital, and sometimes Those shadows didn't neither natural nor friendly. Before he passed away, he gave me this cross to wear around my neck. It was a gift from his godfather. He told me, even during the war, that cross was his candle in the dark. He never took it off, and he always felt that it gave him courage. She opened her woven bag and took the cross out. I inclined my head, understanding. She wore it on my neck and kissed the top of my head. Ever since I wore this cross, I felt more at ease when it would be dark. I stopped using my lamp from time to time. The fear was still there yet. I felt as if your grandfather was next to me, guarding me against whatever was lurking behind the dark curtain of the night. May it be your candle now, a small reminder that dawn always comes even after the darkest of nights. I thanked her profusely and we shed tears of farewell. I love her a lot, and now I know one more reason why. She understood me completely. It wasn't easy getting used to the city life. Working part-time at a bakery and hustling through my engineering degree was taxing on my body. Yet, I had two cool roommates at the dorm, and we kept each other good company in and out of the dorms. I was on one hand, way of my surroundings, especially late at night when I could return home from a party. But I never got rid of my need for exploration, so I knew which routes and shortcuts to use at night, because I had already explored them during the day. One such route, however, was next to an abandoned, soon-to-be-demolished hotel, while it was open for visitation as a soon-to-be demolishes historical landmark. That place gave me the chills since the first time I laid my eyes upon it. It had a very creepy vibe, the same type of vibe I felt towards darkness, only this place made me feel actually nauseous when I was near it, as if something or someone really dangerous was lurking in its shadows of the night. I tried to explore it during the day, to face my fear within its dusty beige and flowery decorated walls that started to smell of mold. Yet, that place was making me feel pure dread, even during the day. Its basement was the creepiest place I had visited in my life. Even during the hours of the day, I felt pure fear just being in there. In its grey walls and emptiness, I could feel a resounding presence. What also didn't help were the local news, which were reporting disappearances of people every couple of months near that area. Since I heard those news, I never went to explore that building again. I even bought a pepper spray can, just in case. When I had to go even remotely near that place, it was right in the middle of my quickest route back home from the city centre. Every night, I used a different route to go home after a party. Every night. Not that night 2 months ago, because that was when I met some monsters. It was a Friday night. The third-year engineering students at uni made a collab party with the philosophy third years. It was an interesting party and people really hit it off. My roommates, Josh and Chris, were also there, dancing and meeting new people. I was there just for the vibes. I had the next morning off at the bakery, so I just wanted to drink a couple of beers and chill. It was almost summer and we had no written exams except for written projects. To it was all good. I decided to stroll back home at around 02:30 a.m. My mates wanted to stay more so. I wished them a good time and went back on my own. It wasn't the first time I did that, and I never encountered problematic strangers on the way home. Not this night. I was halfway through on one of the paths I was using to go home. This path was dimly lit by a couple of street lights. Not many houses were around, only some shops that were closed for the night. I saw from afar 3 large-looking men nudging a person between them. When I took a closer look, I felt terror in the pit of my stomach. That person was a young woman, no older than me, under the street lamp. I could see that her hair were a mess, and something was trickling down from the mouth. Blood. One of those brutes were choking her strong enough to make her not scream for help. I was frozen stiff in fear. Quickly, I moved to the side, behind another street lamp. I sent my GPS coordinates to my mates and told them to call the police right now. Thankfully, they saw my message instantly. I then took pictures and a short video, showing how they were dragging the poor woman with them, and I sent them to my friends. While I was about to call the police myself, I stood appalled and terrified at what I was witnessing. She was putting up a fight, and at one point, one of them punched her in the face. That's what took me out of my terrified state. That woman was suffering, and God knows what else those assholes would do to her. I couldn't rely solely on the police. Friday nights were the worst. The police department would have their hands full of burglaries and other crimes. It would take them at least 10 minutes to respond, and that might be too late for her. So, I looked around me and saw some large stones. I put some in my pockets and threw the largest one at the direction of the men. It hit the arm of one of them with a loud noise. As he turned around to see what was that, I threw another one that hit him square on his temple, and he dropped on the pavement, unconscious. "Come take on someone your size," I shouted, as I threw one stone after another at the other two, hitting him in the shoulder. I was good at aiming. Too many games of dodgeball taught me how to be accurate with my throws. The two assholes dropped the woman like a sack of potatoes on the ground and raced straight at me. I felt the adrenaline hit me, and before I realized it, I was running full speed away from them while glancing back and throwing them more stones. They were screaming in anger as they were approaching me, but I was speeding up. I could feel the vibrations in right pocket from my phone, but I couldn't answer right now. They were gaining on me, so I turned abruptly to my left and used a different path. That path was leading near where the woman was lying, and the third man was still down. I ran and saw that the young woman wasn't there anymore, but the man was still on the ground. She escaped, I thought with glee as I ran and ran in the routes ahead of me. At one point, though, I saw only one of them behind me. Oh crap. I then realized I was in the lot where that damn hotel was, and it had two ways out. If one of them was right behind me, the other was right across me. The lot had no other ways out. It was like a cage because of smaller demolitions that needed to be done in some service buildings right outside the hotel. I looked at the threatening figures gaining on me. I froze for a second. I could escape them by entering the hotel and exiting via the door in its basement. Yet I knew something dreadful was in there, in that basement. Yet I thought, if something dreadful was in there, I shouldn't be afraid. Not now. I needed to be strong. I lunged towards the hotel's entrance, my sudden change of course disorienting my pursuers. They soon followed after me. I was faster than them now in the dark. Under the dim city lights, I could see quite clearly in front of me. I followed the dusty corridor to my right and went down the only set of stairs leading to the basement. That's when I felt it. That's when I knew. Someone was in here. In the almost complete darkness of the basement, the only light that was entering was from the almost closed exit door. No windows, no lamps. When I ran towards the door on the right side of the basement, my feelings of dread and panic multiplied. There was a lock and chain on the door. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I felt the darkness around me like a thick blanket ready to strangle me, while also hearing footsteps on the floor above. The assholes were coming down here. In that moment, I felt as if my life passed in front of me. There was no way out other than those stairs. If I tried to use them now, there was a high chance they would get me while they would come down here. And if they got me, I was a dead man. I knew it. I felt my grandmother's cross over my beating heart. I wasn't alone. I felt a soft feeling of relief and bravery engulfing my trembling limbs. I took a deep breath and, in the pitch-black darkness, the city lights showed me a bunch of desks and chairs towards the left corner of the large room. Those weren't here 2 years ago. I ran towards them, despite an alarming feeling of fear that hit me when I looked towards the dark. Left-cornered, I hid in between some of them offices. They were large and heavy desks, and I found a small nook between two of the ones further to the front to hide in it. People in hide and seek always look for the furthest, darkest corners, not the up-front, obvious hiding places. I held my breath. I then took deep breaths to calm myself down. Beads of sweat fell on my forehead. My shirt was drenched. I felt the ground beneath me and felt something like a heavy brick. I took it in my right hand. If they were to find me or catch me while running away, I wouldn't go down without a fight. I took my phone out, texted my location to my friends, but I had no signal. Damn it! I checked my other pocket. I had a couple of stones left. Maybe I could use them to distract them. The steps got closer to the stairs. I breathed shakily, then slowly, then silently. My heart was pumping in terror as I saw the two men enter the basement. In that moment, my vision got darker, as if the darkness in the basement was thicker, heavier. I felt the cross on my chest become heavy and warm. I raised my left hand and, to my amazement and horror, I felt that the cross was almost too hot to hold. Something was very wrong in this place. The men entered the basement. One of them was lighting up the place and checking the desks one by one, while the other was guarding the stairs. I didn't think that far. They did. If they find me. The cross was now burning in my grasp, but I didn't let go. I was suddenly feeling all my senses to scream at me, to run away from something infinitely more terrible than those two monsters. "Come out, you piece of shit," the dude in front of the stairs shouted, gasping for air. "We will find you, and we will have our sweet time taking turns beating you up, little punk." His voice was deep and was threatening, but it didn't matter. I wanted to shout at them to run away. I didn't know what it was. I looked through the small crack in front of me. I froze. My limbs felt suddenly paralyzed. On the left corner of the room, from where I was standing close to a few minutes ago, was a figure. It was tall, abnormally tall. It was wearing a top hat and a tux, yet I couldn't see arms from the sleeves. It had its back towards the room, but I felt it. It wasn't human. Whoa. I heard the dude standing in front of the stairs when his phone's light centered on that figure. His buddy also audibly gasped. "Who the fuck is that?" one of them asked, and the other just shrugged his shoulders. The rooms felt darker and darker by the second. The light from their phones started to flicker. "Sir, we are looking for a scrawny-ass punk. He is our friend." "Is he a friend like that woman you were planning to have your way with a few minutes ago?" My body now was completely numb. My hand was on my cross and I felt it burn. It was the only thing that reminded me that this was real. That male voice was smooth, almost intoxicating to listen to, but it also felt as if it was a guttural growl from a beast. Or that poor old couple you killed 2 weeks ago, or that young father you found near your turf and shot on the back. Should I go on? The two dudes looked suddenly terrified. One of them pulled a gun out of his pocket. "Who the fuck are you?" The figure slowly turned, and that's when I screamed. There was unending darkness in those empty sockets for eyes, except for an alarming gleam reminiscent of the light of a hunter's moon. The nose was abnormally big and sharp, the face of the skin grey, wrinkled and decaying, and its mouth was terrifyingly wide, with countless black teeth forming a horrific smile that was pointed towards me. The men gasped loudly, one dropping his phone, the other looking towards my direction and then towards that thing. In the last flicker of his phone's light, the figure disappeared from the corner and appeared in front of the two now terrified men. As they started screaming and shooting at it, I saw that thing's upper limbs exiting the tux's sleeves, bony and black from rotten flesh, piercing the head of the dude with the gun. It then tore off the head and threw it to the side, while its mouth took a bite from the headless corpse's neck. The other man screamed bloody murder, but the beast pierced his chest with its limbs and dragging him towards it. Muffled screams and blood gurgling and bone crunching were the only sounds in the basement. The screams were soon gone. The gurgling was gone. The bones crunching sounds disappeared. That thing ate both of them, and I saw it all. Under the dimness of the city lights from the basement's door, and under the flickering of their phones' torches. Not even the bones remained, not even a drop of blood. I was trembling in fear, tears coming down my eyes. I was next. The figure stood. It looked at me, those horrific eyes piercing my own. I felt it hated me in that moment. That thing wanted to tear me to pieces. In an enraged voice, stripped from all the smoothness and the inviting tone of before, that thing growled, "If it wasn't for that thing you have around your neck, I'd have you for dessert." The figure disappeared in a black smog. I don't know how long I was in that nook. I don't know how many hours of shock my brain tried to process. It was way after 6 a.m. that I saw the light of dawn piercing through the basement door. I mustered the courage to crawl out of my hiding spot. I stood up, my mind hazy and dizzy, my limbs trembling from weakness and tiredness. I approached the stairs, not daring to look to my left. Not even a drop of blood was there. Only they're dropped. Crushed phones. Their torches were still on. I left them there. I looked behind me, towards that corner. I could feel it was there, now invisible under the light of day, but waiting. Goodbye, Lucas. I felt terror again in my heart. It knew my name. I ran as fast as I could up the stairs, not looking back. I ran and ran and ran, until I reached in front of my dorms. I entered my room and my friends were there. They looked at me relieved and came to hug me. I hugged them back, crying harder than I ever did before. The terror gave its place in overwhelming relief. I don't remember how I got into the shower and then went to the police station to give a testimony of the events. I met the woman who was assaulted at the police station. Thankfully, she wasn't severely injured by those brutes, and she was already treated at the hospital. When she saw me, she rushed to come close to me and hugged me, thanking me for helping her. She had managed to run away to a nearby pub, and soon after, she contacted also the police. The police had already arrived on the spot where my friends had instructed them to go. Based on the coordinates I sent to them in that message, they arrested that man. After I left the basement and my phone gained signal, my friends sent them the coordinates of the hotel that they had just received. They also checked the hotel. Except for the phones, they found nothing from the other two criminals. I knew, though, as I recounted with the woman and the police the events of that night. I knew what happened to those two, yet I didn't say anything about what that thing did to them. No one would believe me. Those men were wannabe monsters who met their end by the hands of an actual monster. I am now in my room. The lights turned on. Every whistle of the wind outside makes me flinch and look around. Every shadow I see in the corners makes me terrified. I still remember those hollow, dark eyes with that horrible orange gleam. I don't know if I ever feel okay. But suddenly, I reminded myself. I looked at my left palm. The burnt imprint of my grandmother's cross was there, the only reminder of the reality of what happened, and the reminder that in my hour of need, in that thick, murderous darkness, I wasn't alone. I touched the cross over my chest, my candle in the dark. I pulled it towards my temple and, for the first time in my life, I prayed. I prayed in gratitude. I was alive. That woman was alive. The two criminals were dead. The third was behind bars. But the monster was in that basement, lurking, waiting for its next victim. I just hope that, when that building is demolished, that thing will stay in the shadows under the rubbles, forever. Story 9. Cursed Statue. Before telling about my experience, let me introduce myself. I am Amit. In August last year, I lost my wife Cheda and my daughter Gamza, my only princess, in a traffic accident. The car Cheda was driving went under a truck. After my parents' deaths, I thought nothing could hurt me more than this. I'm all alone now, believe me. I've never gone out in the past year except to go to work. I work in a quarry. Most of the time when I'm at home, I just stare at the wall and think about them sitting across from me. One day, I was browsing a second-hand product site on my phone. I came across the colorless statue of a very beautiful woman who was combing her hair. It strangely caught my attention. As I looked at the woman, it was as if I saw Seda. I immediately called the seller. Hello? Hello? Hello, I'm Amit. I saw the statue you offered for sale on the internet. If it is still for sale, I want to buy it tomorrow. Of course, I will text you the address. Okay then, see you tomorrow. After I hung up the phone, the seller sent me the address via text message. He wanted me to be there at 7:30 p.m. I felt like I was really going to see my wife tomorrow. A feeling I had never experienced before was swirling inside me. I don't even know how to describe it. I couldn't sleep until the morning. After work, I got ready and took my car with a box at the back and headed towards the address. I was driving by looking through navigation. I never opened it and looked until I started going to the address. The address showed a village 27 kilometers away from the city. I was starting to move away from the city. I started to see the signs of the village, and now I entered a path. There was a real gloom on the road. The trees were so thick and looked like they came out of a horror movie that they blocked out the sky and cast a slight darkness on the ground. When I finally entered the village, I took out my phone to call the seller. The village looked as if it had been abandoned. There was no one outside. As far as I could see, there were 6 houses not too close to each other. The houses were made of wood, and none of the lights were on except for one house. The seller did not answer my phone call. I pulled the car over and went downstairs. As I looked around in the darkness, I had the feeling that I was being watched. At this exact moment, my phone rang. The seller of the statue was calling.
Hello?
Brother, I think you have come. I see a car outside. Yes, I came. Where are you? I'll be with you in a moment, he said and hung up the phone. I put my phone in my pocket and took out my cigarette from my other pocket and lit it. While I was looking around again, I saw a black silhouette in front of the white curtain of the house in front of me, the lights of which were off. This image scared me a little. I think he realized I was looking at him and slowly ducked under the curtain and disappeared. It was getting darker, and the dimly lit street lamps were illuminating the areas directly below them due to their distance from each other. It was Ahmet, wasn't it? Startled, I turned back. You scared me. Yes, Ahmet, I said. Welcome, I'm Recep. Let's go to the house right across the street, said, pointing to the house whose silhouette I had just seen. Your village is very quiet. It looks like no one is alive, I said with a small smile. Let's say they are not actually very hospitable. They don't go out much when they know someone is coming, he said with a straight face. We started walking towards the house and Recep started talking again. This house was my grandmother's house. It wasn't long ago that he passed away. He was dealing with slightly different things. Anyway, I started selling the valuable things I saw in his house. She has no children other than my father, and I am her only grandchild. In short, whatever remained of him became mine, said. My condolences, Mr. Recep, if you don't mind. There's something I'm curious about. What kind of different things did he do? I said curiously. You'll see it when you enter the house, he said sternly and unlocked the door. I stepped inside behind Recep, trying to reassure myself by thinking that what I had just seen in the window was some kind of optical illusion. There was a strong, musty smell inside. The items were really old. Some of the rooms had things hanging from the ceiling. I couldn't understand what they were, but from the moment I entered the house, I felt like someone was walking with me right behind my neck. There it is, said Recep in a loud voice. The moment I saw the statue, I literally forgot everything. I approached her and touched her face. How can you be so much like her? I said. To who? Asked Recep. Huh? Well, nothing important. I just thought out loud. I guess, I said. Recep continued talking. I have seen this statue in this house for as long as I can remember. But I guess my grandmother couldn't find a place for this statue. Every time I came, I would see it either in a different place or in a changed direction. Who knows what difficulties that old woman had to endure. Anyway, as you can see, my grandmother was the healer of this village, he said, turning towards my face. I just looked at him like I didn't understand, and he continued talking. I always saw her making amulets for someone, protective things, although I don't understand much. She used lard, soap, little dolls, and always a piece of paper. I've never been someone who knows much about this business. She always said he did it to protect someone, he said, and put his hand on the statue's shoulder. Just because I don't understand much about these things. Really? How nice. My condolences again. Thank you. Well, let's carry this to your car. You're taking it, aren't you? Yes, I get it, I said and grabbed the statue by its feet. Just as we picked up the statue and walked towards the door slammed shut. I suddenly turned my head in that direction with a start. Recep motioned with his head for me to take down the statue and open the door. I told you, they are not very hospitable. They started playing games with us, said Recep. Is it a game? Kids? I didn't hear any footsteps. Maybe the wind blew it. I said, but there was really no wind blowing outside. Not the kids, not the wind. Jinns, he said, looking into my eyes and continuing his words. This happens every time I call someone to sell something from this house. They don't want us to take the furniture out of the house. They have adopted it all, he said in a flat and steady voice. Look, brother, I don't know much about such things, but if it means getting into trouble, let's not do this transaction, I said. Nothing will happen. Open the door and let's load this into your car, said. We loaded the statue into the car and I made sure that the lock of the back case was securely locked. I turned around and extended my hand to greet Recepi, but he wasn't behind me. He walked a little towards his grandmother's house, stopped, and had his back turned to me. Recep, you didn't take the money, I called out. He didn't answer.
Recep!
I called out again and he turned around and came to me. He reached out and took the money. Take care of yourself, he said dully and took a few steps back. You too, I said, and started walking towards the driver's seat to get into my car. As I opened the door, I saw Recep looking at me from my rearview mirror, one step behind me, and I quickly turned back. But he wasn't behind me. He was still standing in the same place and looking at me expressionlessly. What the hell kind of place is this? I mumbled and got into my car and started driving home. There was about 5 kilometers left until I reached home, and since I started going back, I had a deep sense of peace inside me. Finally, I returned home and barely dragged the statue and left it in my bedroom, right in front of the window. Her face was turned to the glass. I looked at the clock and it was showing 11:27 p.m. Not being away from home for a long time and carrying the statue really tired my body. I immediately threw myself into bed and fell asleep immediately. When I woke up to go to work in the morning to the sound of my alarm, my eyes first fell on the statue. Her face was turned towards me. I'm pretty sure I turned it towards the glass. How can this happen? Thinking that maybe I woke up groggily at night and turned it around like this. I got ready and went to work. 2. At night I went back to bed to sleep. A clicking sound coming from the living room caught my attention, but I ignored it and tried to sleep. I was about to fall asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The statue was still facing me. She looked like Seda. I ran my hand over her stiff hair, turned her towards the window, and returned to my bed. But it's still the same feeling. I was feeling restless, angry, and many other emotions that I cannot describe at the same time. The living room lamp turned on and went off by itself. What the hell is going on? I said to myself. The lamp blinked again. I stood up feeling very frightened and started walking towards the living room. I stuck my head out and looked around in the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. I took 3 steps forward and turned on the living room lamp. It looked empty. When I turned off the lamp and turned around, I saw a woman's silhouette entering my bedroom with quick steps. "Hey!" I shouted and ran into the room after her. There was nothing in the room, but the statue caught my attention. She was looking towards the living room. Well, I didn't do that. When I turned back, I saw a silhouette walking towards me from the living room. I extend my hand forward. "Don't do that! Please!" "Who are you?" When I opened my eyes, I found myself in bed, sweating profusely. I looked at the statue. She was facing the window, and it was 03:27 a.m. I realized that I was dreaming. I went to the toilet to splash some water on my face. When I started washing my face, a sound of scissors started coming from the shower cabin with its doors closed. When I suddenly turned my head towards the frosted glass of the shower cabin, I saw a black silhouette standing behind it. I slowly pulled the door aside. Inside was a woman whose body was black from burning and full of wounds. She was cutting her dirty hair. When she started to turn her head towards me, I saw that it was Seda. She looked at my face and started grunting as if he was trying to say something. "Seda," I said, surprised and scared. In front of Seda, my daughter put her burned body forward, just like her mother, and looked at me. Her eyes were completely black. I stepped back from the toilet and closed the door. I turned around and lifted my head. Jada screamed in my face. When I opened my eyes again, I woke up in my bedroom. The statue's face was facing me. It was 03:28 a.m. I heard walking coming from the living room to my bedroom. I immediately jumped up and ran to close and lock the door. Just as I was about to close my door, the bell rang. I was torn between whether to open the door or not, and it rang again. I started walking slowly towards the apartment door. I looked through the door hole and there was no one there. As I was about to turn around and go back to the bedroom, this time someone literally punched the door. I suddenly turned and opened the door, but again there was no one there. I shut the door. No matter what happens in the morning, I will taking the fucking statue back to that man, I said to myself and went back to my room. The fear inside me was now replaced by irresistible anger. I returned to my bed, kicking and punching the furniture in the house, and pressed my head into the pillow and started crying. I heard a knock on the bedroom door, which was open at the time, and I turned around. My wife and daughter were looking at me by the door. Their skin was rotten and their eyes were black. They were smiling at me in a disturbing way. My body was literally locked up. I couldn't even scream. I don't know how long they stood there, but when the morning prayer began to be recited, they turned around and walked towards the hall. After about 2 minutes, I looked all over the house, but there was nothing. I immediately loaded the statue into my car and headed towards the village. It was 07:02 a.m. when I arrived at the village. Which house does this guy live in?
Receipt!
I shouted as I took the statue down from my vehicle.
Receipt!
I don't want your statue, nor your money. Just take that back from me, I shouted. As I raised my head and looked around, something terrifying caught my attention. There were black silhouettes in the windows of each of the 6 houses, and they were literally watching me. Their faces or clothes were not visible, just black silhouettes.
Fuck! Enough!
I quickly jumped into my car and headed home. Maybe I'm going crazy, or maybe loneliness isn't that good for me anymore. But as God is my witness, I saw everything I experienced with my own eyes. After the incident, I called Recep, but the answering machine said there was no such number. Ever since I removed the statue from my house, everything has been fine, and everything is the same as before. Actually, in a way it is. Namely, every night after this incident, there is a knock on my bedroom door at 04:00 a.m. My wife and daughter are looking at me, holding hands with their rotting bodies, but they're not smiling anymore, in one way or another. I'm not crazy, and I still enjoy sharing my bedroom with my family. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.